Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host and constant reader, Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by King Newbie and the final remaining Boulder Free Zone spy, Matt Freeman.
Wait, final remaining? What happened to the other guys?
Don't worry about it.
Oh God.
This week on the show, the final book of The Stand, aptly titled The Stand, begins as we discuss chapters 61 through 66. We catch up with all of our Boulder Free Zone spies who die, all except Tom, of course, who escapes the clutches of Randall Flagg. Also, Harold gets what's coming to him, Nadine finally meets her man, and Lloyd gets nervous. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Well, as we're going to get into pretty shortly, this is a really big tone shift, especially after having spent the majority, almost the entirety of the last several weeks with the Boulder Free Zone folks. Mm-hmm. Just a great sense of, evil and darkness and dread as we spend time with a lot of these, more dark aligned characters. And it's, in my opinion, a surprising amount of time in Randall Flagg's head, considering that it's been treated as this sort of distant other, this evil eye in the darkness. I was actually surprised how much time we spend with him. So yeah, overall had a really fun time. Can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast things are moving now too. Like that there's, as I read in that summary, there's a lot of different characters we see this week. There's a lot of things happening. And I actually was looking at our schedule for the rest of the book, and technically the climax of our story is next week. And then the show after next week's is the denouement, and then we're done with the book. So it's like next week is it, Matt. Next week you're going to go from where we leave off this week to basically the end of the story, which is kind of crazy. Actually, it doesn't feel like I tweeted this today because it didn't feel like we've been covering this book. This is episode 13. It doesn't feel like we've been covering this book for over 3 months, but we have, and we're getting near the end here, and it's lots of stuff happening.
Yeah, I think it's just so well paced that at no point do you feel its length.
Sure.
I don't know if I can necessarily say that about some of the books that we've covered. But
I still I enjoyed Insomnia a lot on our read through it. That is a book that felt its length to me, for sure.
Yeah. But there have been no single weeks throughout the whole of The Stand where I was like, it's kind of slow. Not a lot to talk about. That hasn't happened.
Yeah, you can tell just by looking at our episode lengths on that one.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, we're going to get into it really quick. We did have just a couple of quick announcements for you folks. The first is we have another episode of Other Levels of the Tower out right now over on our Patreon account, patreon.com/doofmedia. This month we covered Stephen King's The Dead Zone, adapted by David Cronenberg. A movie that, Matt, you had never seen before, as is true for most of the movies we talk about on that show. And I think you quite liked it, right?
I did. It was, as I say on that show, I was delighted and surprised at how much I liked it. I didn't realize that this was a really good movie, actually, and it is. So it was really fun to talk about that one.
It is a very good movie, and if you want to listen to that very good episode, you can find it at patreon.com/doofmedia and donate at I believe it's the $10 level or higher, and you will get access to that episode and every other piece of bonus content we do, which as of this month is now 24 episodes of Other Levels of the Tower. I can't believe we've been doing that for 2 years. That's so insane. And as well as a whole bunch of other bonus content.
Yeah, if the Dead Zone doesn't seem appealing to you, there's 23 other Levels of the Tower King adaptations to choose from, as well as Scott said, lots of other stuff too.
That's so crazy. I can't get over it. Yeah. So check that out. And then I think we have one more thing we wanted to talk about, right, Matt?
Yeah. Which is just over on the Doofcast, our other podcast where we just talk about books, movies, and other stuff. We have been doing our deconstructing Ridley Scott series for several months now. Where
so many months.
We take each of the films in the filmography of Ridley Scott one by one from beginning to end, or from beginning to latest, I should say. And I guess we're somewhere around the middle. Maybe we're toward the back half now. But we just wanted to mention it because it's been really fun. We've been putting a lot of energy into it. Found a lot of movies in there that we either hadn't seen and liked a surprising amount, or had seen and just liked even more upon kind of revisiting them with a critical eye. And of course, Ridley Scott's films are great. He's a great director, great creator, great storyteller in general. So just want to make you aware that we're doing that over on the Doofcast feed.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Blank Check podcast, if you've ever listened to that one, only we started doing it first. So we didn't steal it from them. You can't prove that. We didn't do it. We did it first.
Yes. Well, we did everything first, Scott.
It's true. We were the original podcasters. Serial stole the idea from us, actually.
As far as we know, we invented the format of one person who has read the thing and another person who has not read the thing.
I haven't done any research to actually conclusively say that that's true or not, but that's absolutely 100% true, and I will not hear otherwise.
Yeah, but by not knowing any better, I can honestly say that that's definitely true as far as I know.
So check out the Doofcast, check out our Other Levels of the Tower episode, check out everything we do, and also check out episode 13 of The Stand, which begins right now. Matt, we move into book 3. As we said, it was titled The Stand, and as is tradition with Stephen King, we get a whole new slew of quotes. Not a whole lot to say about these 3 quotes that appear at the beginning of the book. I did just want to mention them briefly. The first one is a Woody Guthrie quote, but the song "This land is your land, this land is my land." Any thoughts or musings about the decision to include this? I think it is in line with us talking about how just quintessentially American a lot of this book is, that we have this American, not the anthem, but an anthem of America.
Yeah, no, that's about it. It's about America. I mean, it's specifically the land, right? Which we're dividing the land between these two parties, and maybe we're saying, well, it's all of our land, and something like that.
It was made for you and me.
Exactly, something like that. Yeah.
The next quote we have is actually one that comes from in the book itself. Stephen King likes to do this sometimes. It's another character talking to Trashcan Man, saying, "Hey, Trash, what did old lady Semple say when you torched her pension check?" This is a quote we heard during one of the original Trashcan Man sections in the book, and it's just interesting here that it's put in this place. And at the beginning of this book, we are kind of framing it on Trashcan again. And I think, like, when you read this week's chapters, maybe that becomes a little bit more self-evident that like he is rearing his head as a problem that Vegas is going to have to deal with at some point. So maybe this is kind of signaling the importance of Trashcan as we start to round third and head home.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, that was that was kind of a refrain in his internal monologue. Maybe one of his voices, because he seems to hear voices, would basically repeat this line.
Yeah, that's correct.
I don't remember if we ever actually find out what Lady Simple said when he torched her pension check.
I don't think he knows what she said.
Right. I mean, I assumed that he didn't know what she said, but I'm just thinking it would be kind of an interesting thing if he knows what she said and he's avoiding thinking about it. I'm not saying that's what's happening here. It's just a thought.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think you're absolutely right that it's one of the refrains. It's one of the examples of people making fun of Trashcan Man, a thing that really, really bothers him. And we see in this week's reading that some of the people at the Air Force Base were making fun of Trashcan. And what happened there, Matt? They almost all died. Uh-huh. And that is the chaotic nature that is Trash. And that's gonna be some problems coming up, I think.
All right.
The last quote is from the Ben E. King song, "Stand By Me." The interesting thing about this, Matt, is I did look and confirm this because I just wanted to be sure. This was the quote that was in the original 1978 version of The Stand as well, which is before the movie Stand By Me came out, that is based on Stephen King's The Body. So I like that he used this song, which of course has the word stand in it, and it works very well, with the moon and everything. It works very well with a lot of the imagery we're seeing in this week's reading, but I just also like that King put this in here before he even knew that his work would be associated with that song forever.
Yeah, I think I've said before that I sometimes feel like King will be maybe listening to certain songs or certain songs will be on the radio, and those ideas will worm their way into his brain as he's writing the book. And so images and feelings and ideas make their way into the story. And he's on some level aware of where they come from, and so maybe he literally was listening to this song, then he wrote the Nadine chapter or whatever, and then or maybe not that directly connected, but I do think it's more than just like a cute reference. I think maybe there's a chance at least that some of these things were upstream of the stuff that ends up in the books.
I think you're absolutely right.
That might be a thing. If we ever get to talk to him, I'd ask, when it comes to these epigraphs, is it anything like that process that I just described?
No, I think that's a good point. Like, at what point in your mind do you kind of lock in what you're going to put in this particular section? Is it something that like you're going back on your final pass of the edit and it recurs to you, hey, this song was really on my mind while I was writing this section, so let's just throw a quote in here? Like, when in the creation process is this part specifically kind of locked in? That's a really good question. I hope we get to ask that one day.
Because it could be what you just said, but it could be more like a Wild Bow arc title where it's this sort of North Star that guides the creation of the whole part of the book, right?
Yeah, I would totally believe that for sure.
Yeah, it'd be fun to find that out. Anyway,
sure. We'll put that on the back burner and deal with it later because we have to get into the chapters themselves, and we begin with chapter 61. And as we said in the introduction, for the first time in hundreds and hundreds of pages, we are back with the bad guys. Although in this case, it is some of the bad guys that we haven't actually ever met before. We meet Bobby Terry and Dave Roberts. These are two men that have been posted out on the border of Oregon. They were specifically sent there to look for the coming of our first spy, the judge. They're waiting for the judge to show up. They know he's going to be coming this way, and they're waiting to catch him.
Yeah, so like I said before, quite a huge tone shift as we move into this part of the story. Almost feels like a totally different book in terms of tone and voice, I would say. Like it feels like the voice through which the story is told, the point of view voice of these particular characters, including the judge, just feels quite different. I mean, I realize it is a different book in a certain sense because this is book 3 of The Stand. But I guess I was taken off guard by how stark the shift is, and throughout this whole week's reading, there's this pervasive sort of doom and darkness that wasn't present in the previous chapters, I feel.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're in Mordor now, right? So it's things are getting really dark. We're with our bad guys for the majority of this week's reading. So I think basically all of it. I guess you wouldn't technically count the point of view from Tom and Dana a little bit, but they are surrounded by the bad guys. So,
yeah, which gives you even more of a feeling of oppression, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the immediate reaction here that you have, and it's kind of the reaction that we see Dana will have in a bit, is, oh God, Flagg knows that they're coming. We sent these 3 spies here, and Flagg knows that they're coming, to the point where he knows what the judge looks like. He knows about where he's going to be crossing over borders, and that's bad. That's very, very bad, and kind of terrifying in that, like, oh God, his power has gotten to the point where he just knows things now. And the thing I love about this is we learn very quickly as we go through the course of this week's reading that that's only like 2/3 of the way true, right? There's one of the spies that he can't see, but I think the most interesting thing to me is over the course of the 5 chapters we're covering today, Flagg gets a little bit neutered, right? He starts off here in this very moment being this all-knowing, all-seeing eye in a way that's terrifying and completely like overwhelming, to the point like, how are our characters going to win against this guy if this is the full strength of his power? And then over the course of these chapters, we kind of see the chinks in his armor a little bit, and we see how things are starting to fall apart, how the center, to quote the Keats poem at the very beginning, is not holding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as we'll see, the more he tightens his grip in response to this loss of control, the more star systems slip through his fingers, to quote some literature.
We're just quoting so many wonderful pieces of literature today. Yeah.
But I mean, what I mean by that, of course, is he he reacts to his losses with this sort of draconian iron fist, which actually just makes his subordinates sort of behave even more incompetently,
Mm-hmm.
because they're acting out of fear instead of acting out of purpose, like the free zone people are.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think something you and I were talking about this a little earlier today, and it's something that you said to me, is that like the way the commands that he's giving are just making things more difficult as well. Like I love that he doesn't just want to capture and kill the spies. He wants them captured and killed in a certain way. He wants them, I want their heads preserved so that I can send them back to the Boulder Free Zone to make a message. And I love what he says here is like, he's a spy and we could welcome him in with open arms, show him everything and send him back with no harm done. But I want him. And I'm like, yeah, sure, man. Yeah, whatever.
Uh-huh.
Like oh yeah, we could totally, there's nothing I'm afraid of at all, but please capture this person immediately. And if you don't, I'm going to torture and kill you in the most brutal way possible.
Yeah, right. It's interesting how much of his own fear seems to be peeking through. I mean, there's a few explicit moments where we see from inside his own head that he is fearful. He has these moments of fear.
Mm-hmm.
But even a decision like that, you're right. The decision to kill them instead of making what would really be a more sort of overwhelming and demoralizing act by just letting them see everything and then go back and report like how bad the situation is, that does speak of fear, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, he rules through that fear, and
Mm-hmm.
and he rules through the myth making, as we'll see in Dana's chapter that has sprung up around him. This is a guy who can be anywhere and see anything, and you better behave. You better, like, he's the Santa Claus of Las Vegas, and like just the idea that something would happen that is not what he wants, which is something as simple as I asked them to bring this guy's head back, preserved, and they didn't. Is a chink in that armor, and so just the way he's setting himself up to hurt himself in that way.
Yeah, this hasn't really come up in this book yet, but definitely there's the overall King motif that the villains, the monsters in King stories, are very often sort of, they only really understand fear. Like they are afraid, and that's why they do bad things. And then often the bad things they do are designed to create fear in others, because that's their whole world is sort of carved by fear. And I didn't necessarily see Flagg that way until this week, but now that we've spent some time in his head, I realized like, oh, he's kind of another one of these ultimately pathetic, scared child who has been given way too much power characters.
And once again, he doesn't actually know what he's doing, right? Mm-hmm. He's just kind of operating on instinct, in that, like, I think we're jumping ahead a bit, but we'll see it when we get to some of his point of view stuff, that like he can't even remember what his life was like prior to this book starting. Mm-hmm. And so he's just kind of operating off of, I'm a bad guy, I'm going to do bad things, and I hate those people over there, and I'm not even sure why I hate them. It's just because I'm bad guy. And so, yeah, like everything is predicated on this fear he has, of fear of failing, fear of being conquered, fear of losing control, for sure. I think you're totally right there.
Cool.
So then King decides to just attack me personally, Matt. He has Bobby Terry sitting there on guard while also reading some comics. And we get this. He sighed and took another comic book off the stack. Some ridiculous fucking thing called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The Ninja Turtles were supposed to be heroes on a half shell. He threw Raphael, Donatello, and their numbfuck buddies across the store, and the comic book they inhabited fluttered down into a tent shape on the top of a cash register. It was things like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, he thought, that made you believe the world was maybe just as well off destroyed.
So obviously King included this bit to make sure that you hate this character, right?
Yeah, it's a really clever way of just immediately making it, like, it's the killing of a dog moment is the hating of the turtles, is the same effect, I think.
Yeah, I mean 1,000 times worse, really. But
yeah, I agree. Everyone knows the Ninja Turtles are great, and it's funny because this is clearly a 1990 version of the book add-in, right? Because I don't think in 1978 the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles existed. So presumably this was a different comic book prior to his edits. But I mean, it's just one of those things that, like, I love that this was included, because, like, Bobby Terry is going to die horribly in a few pages. He's not going to matter to the story. He's not an important character, but we still have just this moment where we characterize him. It's the old king thing where we characterize this minor character who's going to go away very, very quickly, but we get to see what he's like. And what he's like is annoyed at stupid comic books.
Yeah, so our good friend Trumpet Cop over on the subreddit said that it was Howard the Duck.
I'm sure he showed a similar disdain to Howard the Duck, I'm guessing.
Yes. But it's funny because the TMNT comics are like very different. Like the original ones are like very, very different from the cartoon that we all grew up with. So
yeah, they're like super violent, aren't they?
They're weird. They're like, well, maybe they are super violent. The one that I had was extremely psychedelic, like overtly like, I mean, I didn't know it at the time because I was like 8, but like definitely the product of acid trips. That was my recollection now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. It's a wild concept. I'll give it that. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are a wild concept. But then he's like, oh, Batman, that's a hero I can get behind. And no shade on Batman. Batman's really cool, but that's a man that dresses up like a bat. So that's weird too, Bobby Terry. We've just grown more normalized to that because it's older.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, clearly just a guy who's not very open-minded, right?
Yeah. Fuck this guy. I hope he gets horribly murdered in some indescribable way.
Yeah, really quickly.
No, it's the exact opposite of that.
Or I mean, promptly is what I mean.
There you go. Yeah. So from here, we cut over to the judge himself. And as he recounts his journey up until this point, we see here that like we left him kind of on the best day of his life and things haven't been great from there. His arthritis has kind of really gotten bad as he's made the journey here. The main highways are still pretty blocked, so he's had to go in side roads and it's just taken him a long time. He's also lonely and he's old, and as he passes into the west he starts to get more and more scared, and so it's not this beautiful adventure that I think he was hoping to have as on the first day he set out.
Yeah, I really appreciated the mood and the feel of this section with the judge. Even though it doesn't really go anywhere in the sense that the judge dies pretty much without really accomplishing anything that he set out to accomplish. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, this whole part is just executed so powerfully and leaves you with this feeling of loss and dread and also a little shred of hope, which I think the hope builds more over the course of these chapters, actually, as we see the chinks in the Dark Man's armor. But I just I guess I say that because like you could feel like, oh, it's anticlimactic. Like, oh, we kind of wanted the judge to go on this grand adventure, and then he immediately gets killed unceremoniously. And I wasn't left feeling anticlimax. I was really affected by all of this, actually.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think you do kind of want there to be this epic spying adventure, and he doesn't get it. But I don't know. It didn't leave me feeling unsatisfied either.
Yeah, good.
So we see here that the judge one night holes up in an old motel, and a crow comes tapping on his chamber door. This is like the 7th Raven reference we've had in Stephen King in the past 3 months. We were watching The Dead Zone for Other Levels of the Tower, and that, of course, has several references to Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. And I was just like, man, Stephen, you have your favorites and you use them all the time.
Yeah, The Raven, as well as a bunch of other literature that feels very recurrent from King's oeuvre.
Sure. So the judge looks at this crow, and we see here the crow looking at him seemed to grin. And it came to him with dreamy testicle shriveling certainty that this was the Dark Man, his soul, his Ka somehow projected into this rain-drenched grinning crow that was looking in at him, checking up on him. And this is, of course, like textually true, right? This is the Dark Man. He is looking at the judge here. I had to pull this because it said Ka in it, really. Right. So anything that says Dark Tower words, I immediately have to highlight and put in the script. It's
a legal requirement of the show format.
True. Yep.
But it's interesting, of course, because this is like the definition of Ka that you find when you look up Ka in the dictionary, which is like,
sure, yeah,
like this the spirit. not too much. There's no real hint here that he means anything other than just like the projected soul of the Dark Man. Yeah, he doesn't. I don't feel like in this moment King is referencing the future concept of what will be Ka in his later books. But,
No, I think the concept of Ka in the Dark Tower was probably taken from this definition and then Kingized a little bit. But when he says Ka here, yeah, he's not winking at future us. He's using that old meaning.
Yeah.
So the judge attempts to pull his weapon on the crow, but unfortunately he fails to switch off the safety and it gets away. But I think the most important thing about this moment, and I think the thing that probably leaves you with a little bit of hope, as you said, is how surprised the crow was at this action and how unprepared for it he was. Like there's this real sense in this moment that the book leaves you with, that if the judge's safety was off and he had pulled his gun that fast and acted that quickly, Randall Flagg could have just died right then and there in the body of a crow, right? And we don't know what would have happened. Like, would he have gone back into his human form, or would he just been gone? We don't know. But there is this wonderful moment of like, something happened that he did not expect and did not plan for, and honestly didn't react to fast enough. And that leaves you with a little like, oh, we can beat this guy.
Yeah, right. Because prior to that moment, you feel like, oh, he's everywhere. He can do anything. He's without limit. And then you realize when he shows that fear, that it's like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe he's way more vulnerable than we realize. Maybe him coming out to taunt this guy in the form of a crow is actually just really stupid of him.
Yeah,
and it could have led to his death easily. And the fact that he's doing this kind of thing all the time is actually just really unwise of him, rather than frightening and overwhelming.
I totally agree. I love it so much. And I feel like it's something that's absolutely necessary because, obviously you're kind of seeing the writing on the walls a little bit here, where like so much of this week's reading is about the way in which evil is kind of starting to destroy itself. And as we said, the chinks in that armor are happening. And so I think that's really necessary because we have just sent our four of our main characters to Vegas to confront this man, to basically, as we understood it in the moment, certain death, certain doom. And, especially coming off the fact that he just successfully and flawlessly manipulated both Harold and Nadine into doing this terrible thing. Like he's gotten win after win after win after win. And now we're seeing our characters walk into this, and you want your reader to have just a little bit of hope, right? You want your reader to not earnestly think that their four characters that they love are just going to go die now, and that's going to be it. They didn't do anything. So you need to plant that seed a little bit, and that's what we're doing slowly and meticulously over the course of these chapters, and it kind of begins right here, right now.
It's interesting that you made the comparison to, we're in Mordor now, because it's, absolutely, yes, correct. Like that's the right thing to reach for. I always found the part of Lord of the Rings when they were in Mordor to be exactly what you just said, sort of like hopelessly demoralizing, definitely something written by somebody who fought in World War I trench warfare situation and really understood the idea of utter hopelessness and desolation. And Tolkien does not really give you much in the way of shreds of hope. It's quite a depressing slog, actually, which I like that about it. It's really powerful in Lord of the Rings, but I think here he's intentionally. King he's trying to entertain, right? And so I think he knows, like, if I just dump on them for that many hundreds of pages in a row, they are going to kind of detach at a certain point. So you're absolutely right that to avoid that, he's giving you these little shreds of hope here and there so that you can be like, oh, wait a second, and then kind of mentally have a kind of more excited engagement with the text.
Yeah, and I do wonder as well that, like, if it's just also a representation of a similar philosophy in the idea that evil defeats itself that I think Tolkien and King definitely share, but coming to that philosophy from very different places. They're very different people, and they have very different belief systems, right? And so I kind of love the idea of Tolkien, as you said, a man who's experienced war. King has not. writing really not relishing in, but really getting up close and intimate with the most horrible hopelessness of the reality of this, of Mordor,
Mhm.
and of the reality of evil, while at the end still pulling our characters out of the fire in the last minute.
Yeah.
Whereas King has a very different approach to that, but it, not like worse or anything, just different in
Yeah.
interesting ways.
Yeah, I agree. He is a different person, and he does have different spins on all these things. Yeah.
King's an optimist, man. I think he really is. Like he writes about really bad stuff and bad people, but I think he at heart believes in the good of people.
I think I've read enough books at this point to agree with you on that.
All right. So we're back in the present now as the judge drives by the surprised Bobby Terry. They hop in their vehicle and chase him down. A gunfight ensues, and the judge manages to hit Dave Roberts, but unfortunately, Bobby Terry blows his face off. So that's it for the judge. That's it for spy number one. He's gone. Let's hope that Larry doesn't find out about this, because he will take it personally.
Yeah, he'd probably blame himself, right? I do think we're leading up to the moment where Larry stops blaming himself and internalizing everything and does what the judge suggested and develops some goddamn self-righteousness and maybe actually blames the people who are doing the bad things for the bad things. So if Larry does find out about this, I kind of hope that that's like a moment that galvanizes him to, rather than be like, oh, I shouldn't have sent him, to be like, those sons of bitches, and then, blow them all away. That's what I want to see. I want to see Larry blow everybody away.
All right. Well, I hope you get what you want there, Matt. So obviously he made a mistake, though. Bobby Terry did, right? Because he was under explicit orders to preserve the head of the spies, to bring him back mostly in one piece. And there's this wonderfully terrifying moment, actually, where suddenly, immediately, Randall Flagg is there, transforming from his crow form so fast that a bunch of crow feathers are thrown into the air behind him. And I love, I know you're audiobooking it, so I'm really curious how the audiobook reader read this line, but just the hey Bobby Terry, you screwed it up. Like, it's just, oh, I hear it in my head as like high and shrill and terrifying, as he like chases down Bobby Terry and bites him. Described as worse than crucifixion. What happens to this guy?
I got the feeling that he basically just ate him alive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't say that, but that's what my brain imagined. Yeah, the audiobook, the audiobook reader leans into the description of Flagg as always having like this horrible good cheer.
Mm-hmm.
So even when he's like angry and yelling like this, it's still like has like this aggressively good cheer about it, which is, I think, disturbing actually. It's great. You already basically said it, but this is, of course, once again, evil destroying itself. The Man in Black, he just had to create this own goal by instead of just saying kill the spies, easy win, no sweat. We get to book 1 point in our column. He instead has to do it in the most evil way possible, and so he orders them to be killed, but like not the face though. So like, can you imagine being told to kill somebody, which is already like a stressful thing, and then be told like, but if you shoot him anywhere in the face or head, I'll kill you. It's kind of like, don't think of a blue elephant. It's like you're gonna shoot him in the face,
Yeah. Also, when you're in a gunfight with the guy, right? Like you're not gonna be like, well, I better make sure that I aim only in certain places while he's got his gun trained on me and about to pull the trigger. Like it's an unreasonable ask, and of course they fail at it, and the result is that he looks bad, that Flagg looks bad, because a thing happened that he didn't want to happen, and his whole basis for control is that he knows everything and is everywhere and can do anything. And so when bad stuff happens that he doesn't want it to happen that way, that doesn't look good. And that's kind of the overall theme of this week's reading, I think, is that, oh, look, Flagg is not as in control as we thought.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. If he didn't kind of talk himself up so much in a certain sense, or make himself seem so invulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
then little things like this wouldn't matter so much. That's an
But
interesting way of looking at it.
but how else can he get people to do what he wants? Because that's the entire basis for his power is that he talks himself up, that they create this myth, that they fear him, like, you know, they're like God-fearing men, and that they're terrified of this God that he's you know, putting himself up as.
Well, I mean,
how else could he rule?
well, I mean, so my serious answer to your question is Mother Abigail has done almost nothing, actually, but everyone still sort of almost worships her as a demigod, like to the point where it's sort of ridiculous. So just like being vaguely supernatural and not being a massive asshole might have been enough to garner him like a pretty serious following, but like that wasn't enough for him. He had to be the absolute despot and have everything be the way he wanted it, right? So like it's like a half answer to your question. It's like he could have been the leader and figurehead of the Vegas zone, but in order to get the kind of like terrified fanatical worship that he has, he had, you know, quote unquote, had to be this like monstrous guy who emphasized his, you know, seeing all, knowing all nature.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a question. Do you think, like, is Flagg capable of leading in a Abigail type way? I don't think he has even that capability to him.
No.
Like, this is the inherent flaw of evil, is that evil must kind of lead in this very specific kind of way, and unfortunately this way is flawed, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's his very nature. That's that's his downfall. It's not. I'm just pointing out that like you could be as powerful as Flagg, but not be a massive asshole, and you'd probably be more successful. But that's just that's his nature, actually. So he's going to do it that way. You can't help it.
Yeah. I do like the way King never actually says what happens to Bobby Terry. I think, you know, it involves teeth, so I think him just eating him seems to make sense. But like, I love the way it's described here. The judge had been dead about 18 hours. Bobby Terry considerably less, unfortunately for him, which is just so that's so deliciously written, right? It's like they died within seconds of each other. Or their fates were sealed within seconds of each other, and so whatever was happening to Bobby Terry, it happened extremely slowly.
Yes, if he was eaten slowly. If I love that it's not defined, though. I mean, I'm not even gonna try to say like, oh, I think he was eaten, I think that's the answer. Like, no, like we're not given an answer, we're left to imagine. That's just what I happen to imagine, but I actually very much love it when it's not laid out, right?
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we move on to chapter 62, and in this chapter we catch up with Dana Jurgens, who, unlike the judge, has successfully made it all the way to Las Vegas, and what's more, she's made it all the way to the bedroom of Flagg's second in command, because we see at the beginning of this chapter, she is in the bed with Lloyd Henreid after having just slept with him. So she's obviously the best spy, the most effective spy. Holy shit, she's been in Vegas for 8 days, the book says, and 8 days in, she's already sleeping with the second most knowledgeable person in the whole place. That's pretty damn good.
It is, yeah. I mean, it really makes you even more upset about what happens, because you're just like, wow, she's like the most competent person in the book, actually. Like, man, she should have been a main character. Look at her go.
Yeah.
So do you think that Flagg wasn't aware that she was a spy until basically this moment where they come and grab her?
I think there's a moment, you know, and we'll get to it in just a second, where she's in the middle of doing Lloyd and looks over and sees the red flaw inside the black stone and gets this feeling that it's staring at her. And I wonder if that's the moment that Flagg figures it out.
I think you're right.
I mean, the interesting thing to me is, you know, there is the way the story is structured. She's brought before Flagg immediately after she sees Tom, right? Like, she sees Tom Cullen, recognizes him, and then is like, would they have sent Tom? No way. So she figures out who the third spy was, and then is immediately brought before Flagg. And what does Flagg want to know? He wants to know who the third spy is. So it is possible that perhaps he knew the whole time and was just kind of keeping an eye on her until he was sure she knew something, and or got the feeling that she knew something that he needed to know. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
So I want to just talk about that for a second, because like I've in my own head, without even talking to you about this at all, developed a sort of metaphysical interpretation of this story where and I want to see if you agree, or if it makes any sense to you, where like this guy Randall Flagg is kind of a dumb sap who's being used by something else, and the something else, we can call it the Crimson King. There's a lot of imagery which will later be associated with the Crimson King, but you know that there's the eye, there's the seeking eye that people feel on them. There is the eye in the black stones. There is Flagg's mysterious source of magic that he doesn't understand. And my sense is like the Crimson King is you know the thing that is opposed to the white here, and the Crimson King is the entity or being or force that is sort of looking around, you know, clairvoyantly, trying to sniff out what's going on. What is the white doing? What are the good guys doing? And then that force gives Randall Flagg dreams and visions and intuitions. And Flagg doesn't know where those are coming from. Like, he's not in charge of the eye. He isn't the eye. Like, I think the text is fairly explicit that Randall Flagg isn't like aware of being this force that is able to rove around the countryside and look at stuff. It's his relationship with it is a lot less direct than maybe we would have assumed previously, and he's a lot more of a sort of dumb, bumbling guy who doesn't really, like you said before, doesn't understand what he's doing. He's being told information and doesn't really know where it's coming from. And I think that's because we have, as we see repeatedly throughout the Dark Tower mythos, we have the Man in Black, who is not nearly as powerful and kind of dumb, and then we have the Crimson King, who is much more powerful but not really able to act directly in the world. Does any of that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. This is the part where I'm trying to be careful, a little bit careful here, because I don't want to gesture towards anything that hasn't happened yet. But I think that's a completely fair read of the book and who Randall Flagg is as a person. I certainly agree that he doesn't seem to know what's going on. He doesn't really have a plan. We do get these little instances throughout this chapter of a voice talking to him and giving him information. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if like he's not even getting this information from himself. He's just being fed it by some other entity. And what that entity is it the Crimson King or the Crimson King stand-in?
Yeah.
Very, very possible. Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, because I just realized that all of this had kind of formulated in my head and we haven't talked about it at all. So
yeah.
I
think that's totally fair. Yeah. Okay. So through Dana, we do learn a little bit more about the situation in Vegas. First, we learn that Flagg has pilots working to learn how to fly some fighter jets, and that their time frame, Matt, is way quicker than anyone anticipated. They figure that they will have the jets, have the guys kind of signed off on the jets and ready to go by October. I believe it's early September right now. So within a month, they will have people capable of flying fighter jets and flying anywhere in the United States. And so, you know, our situation for the Boulder Free Zone, I think they thought, you know, maybe they had the winter, and then come spring, they were going to have to deal with this Dark Man problem. And we see here immediately that, oh no, it's actually, our timeline is much, much shorter than that, which does kind of explain the White and Mother Abigail's kind of insistence that they deal with this problem now, right?
Yes. And you know what else would have been a good defense against fighter jets would be not all being congregated in the same place.
Yeah.
Which is something we've also discussed previously as a mistake that they're making.
That is true. It's a bad idea when your enemy is out to get you, for sure.
Yeah.
More importantly, though, we already kind of talked about this, but we'll reiterate it here. We learn how Vegas treats Flagg. He is not a man to them, but he's kind of been built up as a kind of god, a kind of myth. Like the stories that they tell about him kind of embellish how much he knows and where he can be and what he can do, and it's plain that he rules due to this mythological nature, this fear, this awe of him. um Vegas isn't like it's he's not like he's not worshipped in the way God or Mother Abigail is, but he's people are terrified of him.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of that classic Twilight Zone episode about the all-powerful child that everyone is in awe of, but they kind of pretend that everything is normal. And we see that, as you just said, everybody actually is almost acting aggressively nonchalant and trying to act like they're living in a normal existence. They do talk about Flagg, but they don't talk about him in the way that, in a worshipful way. But like everything in their day-to-day life is dominated by him and because of him and ordered by him. And so it's a kind of totalitarian terror regime.
Certainly. I love the detail that they won't really even say his name when talking about him. They have all these other nicknames to refer to him, but it's almost as even saying his name is kind of gesturing too directly towards him in a way that could get them in trouble, so they won't even do that.
Yeah.
All right, so Dana and Lloyd are getting it on, and then we have the thing we referenced a little bit earlier, where she, in the middle of it, looks over and sees his necklace sitting there on the bedside table, and we see she happened to glance over at the night table. Black stone, red flaw. It seemed to be staring at her. She had a sudden horrible feeling that it was staring at her, that it was his eye with its contact lens of humanity removed, staring at her as the eye of Sauron had stared at Frodo from the dark fastness of Barad-dûn in Mordor, where the shadows lie. Man, doing your work for you a little bit here, right?
I'm starting to think that maybe King has read Tolkien. Actually, like, it's time for me to bring up a thing that I discovered just in my routine life of being obsessed with J.R.R. Tolkien, which is that Tolkien explicitly viewed Sauron and his orcs as manifestations of the rationalist spirit. And those words, he used the word rationalist. In, of course, the historical sense of the word rationalist that the King is also referring to here. So it's pretty explicit here. King, not only does he love the visual and the thematic motifs of Tolkien, but he has clearly either read Tolkien's letters or at least read the books about Tolkien and Tolkien's correspondence and Tolkien's lectures, and he understands Tolkien's thoughts beyond just the text of The Lord of the Rings, because that's where that comes from, right? Like
yeah,
I'm right about this.
No, this was something that I did not know, and the second you shared it with me, I was like, yes, 100%, absolutely. I mean, the one thing that I maybe we've said this before, but I'll say it again, is I'm pretty sure King has explicitly said that The Stand is his attempt at doing Lord of the Rings. I know we've talked a lot about the Dark Tower and that kind of being his Tolkien attempt, and there is a lot of similarities there as well, but I really think he set out to write The Stand as Lord of the Rings. And I mean, this is that understanding of rationalism and the rational evil, I think is just making that all the more textual for sure.
Yeah,
it's perfect. I love it so much. I mean, like, it also makes it seem like you are the most knowledgeable person in the room constantly, because every time you've pointed towards a Rings reference, that was clearly King wanting you to do that the whole time, even the most ridiculous ones.
Yeah, even the cave being a Shelob reference was.
Yeah,
I mean, it's been extremely gratifying, I have to say, to sort of at first be basically joking that the Dark Tower specifically had all these Lord of the Rings references, and then the more I learn about King, the more I realize that he is a Tolkien aficionado and was probably doing almost all these things, if not on purpose, then at least like these things had soaked into his subconscious and he was channeling them.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of subcreation, Tolkien's subcreation being a thing that is also very explicit in the Dark Tower. Yeah, I don't know. Makes me happy because if you didn't know, I think Tolkien's pretty cool. And So it's just neat that this King guy also thinks Tolkien's pretty cool, and it's just great, and I love it. It makes me happy.
It is great, and you know what it does? Bad news for you, Matt, because Lost was created. They stole a lot of stuff from The Stand, right? Like that. We've talked about this in the past. That the creators of Lost specifically said they were pulling a lot of their ideas from The Stand specifically. So if Lost is The Stand, and The Stand is Lord of the Rings, and that means, Matt, that Lost is Lord of the Rings, and therefore you have to like it. I'm sorry. Let's do a podcast.
Now, Scott, I'd be tempted to push you off here, but I have to admit that Lost has a Hobbit in it, and it also has an elf in it. If you count the Hobbit movies, which you shouldn't really, but
irrefutable evidence that Lost is just Lord of the Rings, and we should watch it again and talk about how good it is.
Let's do a podcast episode on Lost.
Episode. Well, how about like a few more than just one episode?
Like 3?
Yeah.
We'll talk. We'll talk, Scott.
Dozen.
3 dozen, 300. Yeah, I know you.
I was actually trying to see how many episodes Lost is while you were talking.
It's a lot, isn't it? How many seasons is Lost?
It was 6 seasons. Yeah. And then I think up until season 4, they did the full old network TV, which was 22 to 24 episodes a season.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I was trying to buy time, but it didn't really.
Okay.
Didn't really work. No, this isn't going to work. It's a lot. It's a lot. There's a lot of episodes. It's not 100 though, so. We've done way more episodes on Stephen King than we have on Lost. So you have no excuse.
Is that how the logic works there? I don't know.
Look, all I'm saying is I've had a name of a Lost podcast in my head for literally 4 or 5 years, and it's a great fucking name, and you won't just do the fucking show with me, and I'm gonna resent you for it forever.
Okay, Scott, you've got quite a backlog of shows that you're mad at me for not doing with you. So
that's true, but this is probably the most of them.
You'll just have to get in line with yourself.
See, the thing is, I would love to do a Buffy podcast with you, but that's never gonna happen. And also, there are a bunch of Buffy podcasts that say things better than us already, so I feel like that's a tapped market, and it's not like a Lost podcast isn't a tapped market. I just know very specifically that you and I have a lot of things to say about Lost, many of which don't agree with each other, and so I'm like, that would be great content. I want to make that.
It would. And as you've already sort of sold to me here, I would just be able to talk about Lord of the Rings constantly to the point that it became obnoxious.
That is the dream, right? The dream is for you to talk about Lord of the Rings as much as possible without doing an actual Lord of the Rings show.
That's how I'd like to live my life.
Okay, we have to get back to this book, but okay. We'll talk offline about this future Lost podcast that you've definitely agreed to do now. All right. So we also, in this moment, reintroduce the Trashcan Man, Matt, who we learn has been super key in helping the guys figure out how everything works. No one could figure out how to attach the missiles to the planes that they were all training on, and Trashcan walks up and figures it out in 6 hours, which is great. It's really great news that he's really helping attach missiles to weapons, and I'm loving it. He's also continuing to travel out into the desert. He's smelling out weapons and ammunitions. Somehow he's able to just find them. So just the book kind of reintroducing Trashcan to us.
Yeah. It's interesting because it reintroducing, I think, is a good word, because I think it causes us to see him differently than maybe we did from his point of view chapters. Sure. The text did emphasize that he had sort of a supernatural way with machines, but having the other characters remark on his supernatural way with machines really kind of makes it clear, emphasizes that it is something very special, very powerful, and meaningful to the story. Because, like you said, it's accelerating the timetable with which they can attack.
Yeah, and it's God. There's so much I want to say about Trash. I think I'll hold off until we learn a little bit more about him. But in the later chapters of this week. But man, I'm glad we're reintroducing this character. I missed his character, actually.
Cool. Yeah, me too.
So Dana goes about her day job in Vegas, which is to change some of the light bulbs and the street lamps, and in doing so, she gets to communicate a little bit about the communities. And this is a long quote, but I'm going to read it because I think this is really important to one of the things the book is doing in this moment. She thought that Vegas had a rather larger proportion of stupids than the zone, but none of them wore fangs, and they didn't turn into bats at moonrise. They were also people who worked much harder than she remembered the people in the zone working. In the free zone, you saw people idling in the parks at all hours of the day, and there were people who decided to break for lunch from noon until 2. That sort of thing didn't happen over here. From 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., everybody was working, either at Indian Springs or in the maintenance crews here in town. And school had started again. There were about 20 kids in Vegas, ages ranging from 4, that was Daniel McCarthy, the pet of everyone in town, known as Dinny, up to 15. They had found 2 people with teaching certificates, and classes went on 5 days for a week. Lloyd, who had quit school after repeating his junior year for the 3rd time, was very proud of the educational opportunities that were being provided. The pharmacies were open and unguarded. People came and went all the time, but they took nothing heavier than a bottle of aspirin. There was no drug problem in the West. Anyone who had seen what had happened to Hector Drogan knew what the penalty for a habit was. There was no rich Moffats either. Everyone was friendly and straight, and it was wise to drink nothing stronger than bottled beer. So that paints a pretty clear picture there, Matt. And the interesting thing to me is, obviously, there are parts of this that you look and like, I don't like that. But there are also parts like, oh, they started up school again. That's good. I like school. Teaching kids is important.
Yeah.
It's really, really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. There's no school in free zone. Yeah.
Yeah. They haven't even thought about teaching the children over there, those fucking bums.
Yeah. They're way ahead on they're replacing the light bulbs. No, I mean, it's really interesting. I agree. Like, and I'm, editorializing obviously, but like totalitarian dictatorships can often be very peaceful and very civilized and very orderly because you can just murder anyone that causes problems.
Yeah.
And then, maybe the marginal cases who might be inclined to cause problems are just terrorized into subservience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then everyone else is just terrorized into like pretending to be happy all the time. I like the line, like everyone else was friendly and straight. It's like, yeah, you're going to act friendly when you feel like being, not being a good part of the society is going to get you sort of singled out for attention, right? You just want to kind of be invisible. And the best way to be invisible is just to be like, yep, everything's great. I'm happy. Of course I'm happy. No complaints here. Right.
Yeah. It's really interesting because obviously Dana in this moment makes the Nazi Germany comparison, which is very apt. But it's just really fascinating to me the ways in which what King is doing here is like, showing this picture of this industrious, hardworking group of people that in a lot of the tenets of American society, you would be like, oh, good, this is good. Look, no one's lollygagging around. Everyone's working. Everyone's doing something. Everyone's contributing to the community and working hard. And no one's a lush. No one's fucking around. And it's like, oh, look, we did it. We made a utopia. Except, well, there's this whole problem of actually everyone's constantly afraid and completely controlled and has no freedom to do anything, and it's an illusion, right? And I love that we see this here.
Yeah, well, it's the rationalist dream in the sense of rationalist that King has been using it, where everything is orderly and in its place and organized, and it's the opposite of freedom. It's you don't have the freedom to choose. The choice has been made for you because somebody higher up the chain figured out what it was that you should be doing. It's all been rationalized and figured out scientifically and calculated, and that's why they got the power on faster, right? But it's not because they said, hey, who wants to come help with the power? And then people had the choice. It's because you were told you're going to go work on the power now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just like democracy in general is a horribly inefficient form of government, right?
Mhm.
Like it takes way longer for a group of people that it has to vote on representatives and have those representatives vote on changes than it is for one person to just go, okay, we're doing this now. But that is the sacrifice we make for freedom, for, choice and opportunity and those kind of things. And
Yeah.
so yeah, you can design a perfect society like this in which everyone does exactly what they're told to win, but as we see through the course of this chapter, that there are severe flaws in that leadership style, and it is very easy to fall apart, as it seems starting to be doing here as we hang out in Vegas.
Yeah, I really like that contrast you just sketched, because yeah, this is why we spent so much time in the free zone with Nick Andros, agonizing over like, how do you build a society that's actually good, and like, of course these people don't have to worry about that at all, because it's just top down tyranny, and they just do what they're told. So yeah.
So while she's up changing a street lamp, Dana does get a quick glimpse at Tom Cullen as he walks into Vegas with another group. So we know that he has made it to Vegas as well. And now Dana kind of reasons, oh, is he one of the other spies? Oh, no.
Yeah, I did also kind of wonder if this moment isn't what drew the attention of the eye, but I think you're right that it was probably the earlier moment.
I mean, it certainly could have been. I mean, like we said, the next thing that happens from here is that she's dragged into Flagg's room and questioned. So,
yeah,
I do like Dana's kind of reaction to learning that Tom Cullen was one of the ones that they sent, which is like similar to how Franny did it, which was like flabbergasted, like how why? But then she goes, "It was maybe genius." And it's just like, I love it so much.
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, I can acknowledge that there's some rationale behind it, but my main reaction is still that it's ridiculous and I would never do this thing. But yeah, no, I mean, it just story wise, now we're like worried because she saw Tom Cullen, she recognized Tom Cullen, so now you're like, well, now she like knows, right, and this is going to be used against her. And it makes us worried when she's being questioned later.
Yeah, and I love that we move directly from that anxiety into executing off of that conflict immediately, because the next scene, Dana wakes up suddenly surrounded by all these people. She's been figured out as a spy. Flagg knew it was her, and now they're taking her up to him. And I love, like, Dana is with this group of people, one of which is one of her friends that she worked with on her day job, and she's like desperately trying to convince them that what they're doing is wrong, that this whole situation is wrong. And I love how their responses reflect the society we've come to know Vegas is. Like I believe it's her friend whose name I'm blanking on right now, but maybe Lauren is her name, something like that. But she says, "I hope they do. It's us or you people." That's what he says, and I believe him. And her response is, "They believed Hitler too, but you don't believe him. You're just scared gutless of him." It's a really great moment, but I love this, like, it's us or you people. That's what he says. They have none of the people in Vegas have any inclination about anything that's going on in the free zone, and any of these people being a threat to them or their way of life. But it's just Flagg reporting that to them, and they're so terrified that they're just taking his word as bond.
Yeah. And I mean, I think Dana's right here that it's not so much belief as just like, I'm just gonna go with whatever he says. Yeah. But like whether or not they believe it, they're like, yeah, if you say so, sir. But yeah, no, I mean, Dana in these moments, like you said, comes off looking like a total badass, like just super awesome and competent and heroic, and you really feel like she deserved much better than she gets here.
Yeah, you're definitely right. Unfortunately, she doesn't get a whole lot. So yeah, we see Dana is taken before Flagg, who demands to know who the third spy is. But first the two of them have a little chat about Lloyd, and I wanted to use this moment for us to have a little chat about Lloyd, because Flagg says, "Lloyd went through a rather bitter experience in Phoenix when the flu was raging. He doesn't like to talk about it. I rescued him from death, and..." His smile grew even more disarming, if that was possible. "And from a fate worse than death," is the popular idiom, I believe. "He associated me with that experience to a great degree, although his situation was not of my doing. Do you believe me?" She nodded slowly. She did believe him, and found herself wondering if Lloyd's constant showering had something to do with his rather bitter experience in Phoenix. She also found herself feeling an emotion she would have never expected in connection with Lloyd Henry: pity. So, we talked a lot about Lloyd when we met him, man, and his experience in Phoenix. And then we saw a brief glimpse of him in his role as second in command in Vegas, but then we left him behind for a good month or so. And so I wanted, as we catch up with Lloyd here and what we're seeing of him here, I just wanted to see how you're feeling about him at this point in the book.
It's definitely interesting in a number of ways. My first reaction, not necessarily my final reaction, is that I was, for whatever reason, just started automatically comparing and paralleling him against Harold, and maybe seeing him as a kind of inverse Harold, because Harold is this highly intelligent but disagreeable to the point of being psychotic person, and Lloyd is markedly unintelligent, but he's very agreeable, agreeable to a fault. He'll just go along, right? This is not to excuse his actions, but over and over with Lloyd, his problem throughout the whole book, even from the very beginning, was just a willingness to go along with whatever, even if it's, bad and he's uncomfortable with it. And he knows it's bad, and he's like, this is kind of bad, but I guess this is what we're doing now, and it's just interesting because weirdly enough, Lloyd comes off as being more likable just because he's kind of dopey in that way that's like, Lloyd, sure. Whereas Harold, like, you just kind of hate him for obvious reasons. But yeah, Lloyd has just been a very fascinating character. I don't know, I kind of want to say one of my favorite characters, despite the fact that we've been away from him for so long. I just love the way he's set up, and I do wonder where we're taking him.
Yeah, I mean, we'll find out. I agree with you. I love he's this torn character, right? And we'll see more of that in the next few chapters as well. But this guy who is horribly traumatized by what happened to him in that prison. I love the bit there of he's constantly showering. He's constantly trying to clean himself. He's constantly trying to wash off the stench and the taint of what he did, eating another human being. And I mean, we could maybe extend that out to what his life was before, what his life was to get him in that prison in the first place. And then what he did in there. And he's constantly trying to wash that off, but he's never succeeding. And part of that is because he's standing next to the ultimate dirt collector in Randall Flagg, and so like he can't wash any of that off as long as he's allying himself with this man who maybe didn't cause any of that stuff. As he says, I think he's right here, his situation was not of my doing. That is true, it was not. It was of his own doing, but it is that type of situation that this man takes advantage of again and again and again.
And also just Flagg definitely like unnecessarily fucked with him in the course of getting him out of that cell.
Yes.
Which just exacerbated all of the problems that were going on. So yeah.
Definitely. So he's both terrified of Flagg and also feels this great amount of loyalty to him because he was the man that got him out of the situation, right? He's the man that saved his life, that rescued him from this terrible situation. So yeah, he's very torn on this guy, and I love seeing it play out.
Me too.
I really also really enjoy Flagg's attempt to hypnotize and win Dana over here, Matt. Like this rehearsed script that he puts out about like he doesn't want any trouble with anyone over there. Like, have I done anything against you yet? I don't want any trouble. I just want to live and let live. It's you guys that are sending spies over here, and it's you guys that are doing all that. Like, it's all bullshit, and we kind of know it's bullshit, but it's very well argued bullshit. It's really entertaining and cruel a little bit, for sure.
Yeah. No, it's really great writing. It's some of my favorite writing here. And I'm going to be honest, like, this makes me sound really dumb. And it's not that I believed that he was going to leave the free zone alone. But for a minute, I was like, wait, maybe he will just let her go after she tells him what he wants to know. That's how stupid I am. But I think that just speaks to like how Flagg can be super seductive and persuasive. Yeah. He kind of I've said that he's dumb in this conversation a couple of times now, and it's like it's not quite the right word. he can be extremely good at what he's good at.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that he's only good at these certain things, and being really manipulative, being like the, in the way that the devil is said to be manipulative and able to talk you into things. That's one of his superpowers, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree with that for sure. We get this, in the middle of this whole rehearsed bullshit. We get this part. I need to talk to you about this. So the text says they're talking about, let the people in the future deal with it, right? He says that's if the babies live, something we won't know about here for at least 5 months. If they do, and humanity continues, let our grandfathers fight it out if they have a bone to pick, or their grandfathers. But what in God's name do we have to fight about? So this is something I never noticed before in this book, but I was highlighting this passage to just talk about it generally, and I highlighted the word grandfather, and I said,
What?
That's not the right word. Do you mean grandsons or grandchildren, Stephen? Is that what you meant here? And it's one of those things where it is very possible that this is just a mistake. Stephen King is a human being, and human beings make mistakes. Editors are human beings, and editors can miss things. And it is very possible that no one ever caught this. Just like no one ever caught the fact that traveling from New York City to Orlando, Florida, it does not make sense to go through Texas. No one ever caught that. So it's very possible this is just a external to the book oopsie. But we are analysts, Matt, and we get to play the game of the author's a genius and everything's intentional. And therefore we get to look at this and say, maybe Flagg just made a boo-boo. Maybe this is another, albeit subtle, way of reinforcing the idea that Randall Flagg is not the all-knowing, all-powerful being. He's just a dude who's has magical powers given, but really doesn't know what's going on, and just made a boo-boo here.
Yeah, he doesn't understand humanity.
Sure.
Is just kind of reaching for some words that he knows, like, yeah, humans have like grandfathers, right? That sounds like the right word to me. And no, I mean, I don't think we're needing to suspend our disbelief to say that this is an intentional, error. With I don't know what the word is for intent. There's got to be some kind of highfalutin word we can use for that.
I believe it's called a boo-boo.
A boo-boo. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a boo-boo. Because the error, such as it is, has persisted through 2 different versions of the book, and it's in the audiobook. Because I noticed this when I was listening. I was like, what? Grandfather? And I was, and in that moment, I was like, did the audiobook reader make a mistake? Like, did the audiobook reader just read the word wrong? Because that's not impossible. And then I think even in the moment though, I was like, no, maybe Flagg doesn't know what a grandfather is or what a grandchild is. Which is, I think my preferred interpretation is like the text is making the point that he's losing his humanity. Mm-hmm. And those words feel like the sort of thing you would lose your grip on as you lost your humanity.
I love it. No idea if it's true, but it is now.
Yep, exactly. That's how that works. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the other thing he tells Dana in this moment is that Mother Abigail has returned to the zone, but only just to die. He says, I thought she might speak, but she died in a coma. Are you sure? His smile reappeared, as radiant as the summer sun burning off ground fog. And we'll learn a little bit more about how sure he is about that. And of course we know, right? We through the magic of dramatic irony know that he's wrong here, that Flagg is wrong, that she did say some stuff. She said quite a great deal, actually. And Flagg is somehow completely unaware of it. It is unknown to him.
Yeah, the eye of the king didn't see it, or whatever. Mm-hmm.
So with all the pretense gone, Flagg demands to know the name of the third spy. And again, Dana is kind of shocked that he can't see it, that for some reason spy number 3 is hidden from his eyes. We'll learn later, actually, that every time Flagg tries to turn his magical eye towards spy number 3, he just sees the moon, and he gets MOON. That spells moon. And he doesn't understand what that means or why he's seeing it. So Matt, maybe you were wrong, and sending Tom Cullen was actually brilliant.
I still wouldn't have done it, but
it's brilliant.
I mean, he is magical enough to have gone undetected. the question for me is just like, and I guess we'll find out soon enough, probably. But I'm like, well, what did he find out that was valuable? I guess maybe he found out that they have fighter jets. I don't know. I mean, we'll just have to see. It seems to me like you sent him, and yes, he did survive, and he did manage to escape. But what was the point anyway? I mean, Dana at least would have had some really valuable intel based on her position. I'm going to stop talking now because I think the answer is going to be, oh, Tom found out some incredibly useful piece of information that I don't know yet, and he's going to deliver it to the important party, and it's going to make a huge difference to the plot. But because that's the way you structure a story. But but I don't know. I don't know what it is yet. So
very possible. I mean, it is really interesting that like they sent these spies out there to gather information for them, and then weeks later, we're told they need to go out there anyway. And so the idea of reconnaissance or spying is kind of lost in a world where, oh, we have to have we're actively going to have our final stand. Yeah, I mean, I think that the Tom of it all is still a bit of a mystery, but I think it's clear, at least in the book as it is right now, that the reason to send the judge and the reason to send Dana is not actually to get information and report back. It's to just, from the Whites' perspective, pawns in the game to reveal Flagg's weakness and powerlessness, because here are two characters that elude his grasp, because as we're about to see, the judge did not go the way Flagg wanted it, and then Dana gets away from him via death.
And she also screws up her face too, which isn't even something she's really doing on purpose. It's just in both cases it foils his plan like perfectly.
The interesting thing about that is that, so the way how this all plays out is that Dana realizes that if she's interrogated long enough, she will tell Flagg about Tom. And so she's got her spring-loaded arm blade that she keeps referencing. So she tries to bring that out, and suddenly that's a banana. And so that doesn't work. And so instead she just throws her body and her head into the window of the hotel, smashing it open, and then impales her neck on a shard of glass, killing herself. Again, Flagg could not see that coming. He could not stop that. And so that's another point of failure. So it could be very possible. Again, there is some still mystery around Tom Cullen because he's still alive and at the very end of this week's reading, biking out of Vegas. But it could be that the entire purpose of the spies was just as pawns to represent Flagg's failure, because Tom even getting away is still failure, right? Like he didn't get the judge the way he wanted to. He didn't get the information he wanted from Dana. And then spy number 3 manages to elude his grasp. And so that's failure 1, failure 2, failure 3. And so maybe like you can kind of see a way in which the White, the same White that's going to send a group of 4 people to just go there and do something, would use people as just pawns in this game, Job-like pawns in order to prove a point or expose a weakness or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And, it actually makes the deaths of these two characters feel less kind of wasteful to have it articulated that way. That like, well, it feels like they died for nothing, but in fact, they died to undermine the Man in Black's position, which will be taken advantage of potentially. Yeah.
So again, the worst part about this, I guess, outside of poor Dana dying, the worst part for Randall Flagg is that Lloyd is there to witness what happens here, as the rest of his not most senior people, but definitely some important people in the city. And so from here we follow Lloyd as he disposes of Dana's body. We get this wonderful scene where we see him being a sort of parent to that young kid that was mentioned offhand, that kid Denny, who has kind of just become like they call him the pet of the group, but there's some real love he has for this young boy. And then we see Lloyd kind of sit down and ruminate on Flagg and what he just saw. And I love this quote here. First the judge, now the woman, both dead, and neither had talked, neither had been unmarked as he had ordered. It was as if the old Yankees of Mantle and Maris and Ford had lost the opening 2 games of the World Series. It was hard for them to believe, and frightening.
That's great.
So there it is, Matt. Oh, it's so good, right?
It's frightening. Yep.
frightening
It's
for them. It's good for us.
exactly for frightening. That's once again, the idea of fear being the only thing that the darkness really understands. I thought it was interesting how little Lloyd thinks about Dana.
Yeah, I mean, he's more her
Right.
death to him doesn't mean, oh, this lady died and I feel bad about that. It's more, oh, what does this say about Flagg?
Yes.
I mean, let's be clear here. Like, we like Lloyd. He's not a great person, right?
No.
I mean, he is a very confused person who tends to glom onto whatever type of people he's around. But yeah, he clearly doesn't have a lot of love and affection towards her, and I think was definitely just using her for the sex, as she was just using him for the information. And
yeah, I think to the extent that I wanted to dig into this, I was asking myself, is it that he doesn't care about her at all, or maybe he did care about her a bit, but he's just putting it out of his mind because, well, Flagg told him to do this,
Sure, yeah. And I think it does make sense to be as charitable to Lloyd as possible. It does make sense that in the moment, the more direct concern to his ongoing well-being is not, oh, I'm sad about this woman that's died, but oh my God, I'm in deep in this whole thing, and suddenly the man I kind of put my entire faith and life and existence in is not as good and not as strong as I thought he was.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I'll just make the point now that he continues to not think about Dana even later when he's playing solitaire. So
that is true.
So that again, either means he doesn't really care about Dana, which is possible, or that he's just avoiding it. I don't know. It was just a question that I had in my mind, and the text doesn't really tell us.
Sure. So we move on from here to chapter 63, another quick one-page chapter. And if I had to guess, like, structurally what we're doing here and why we have a random one-page chapter in the middle of this, I think in his mind, King thought of, we're gonna come out of book 3 and we're gonna go bam, bam, bam with our 3 spies, and we're gonna have a chapter each covering one of our 3 spies. But he wasn't quite ready to do like the full Tom Cullen experience in Vegas yet. Like, he wanted to save that for a little bit later, and so he had to stay true to his structure he's created. We have this really quick one-page chapter that has Tom Cullen kind of living his life in the zone, and then ends on a bit of a cliffhanger as our favorite villainous, horrible woman Julie Lowry makes her triumphant return to the book a mere 600 pages after we first met her. She is in Vegas and she recognizes Tom, and we know immediately that could mean a whole lot of trouble for him, but a whole lot of good news for Randall Flagg.
Yeah, if only everybody in Vegas weren't increasingly totally incompetent.
That is very true. And so from here we move to chapter 64, and 90 minutes into the show, Matt, we are on my favorite chapter of the book, and the one I want to talk about the longest. So that we're doing great on time. We're doing really great. So we are here in chapter 64, in which the final fate of Harold Lauder is revealed. King once again employs his structural conceit of starting in media res here. And so we start with Harold lying there dying, and then flashback to how he got in this situation. And I think it really works fantastically in this moment here. I love, before we even know that this is Harold Lauder, the opening words of the chapter are, "The dying man opened the permacover notebook, uncapped his pen, paused a moment, and then began to write." So, I mean, you kind of quickly realize it's Harold, but just it being the dying man is the first thing we know about him, is that he's dying now.
Yep. This is, first of all, definitely a case where I think the drama of the scene is amplified by doing it in media res.
Absolutely.
And also just, it's a genius little short story, right? I mean, we haven't said this in a few weeks because I feel like most of the recent weeks have been chapters that were more part of an ongoing plot, and so they didn't give you that feeling of like, oh my God, that was an epic little short story. But this chapter is an epic little short story, right? It's this delightful analysis. It's a character analysis. It's like a re-understanding of who this character is and was, and why, and how he sees himself and who he could have been. And I just love. Yeah, well, let's just go through it because there's so much to say.
Absolutely. Before we do that, though, we have to say what happened to Harold, which
Yeah.
is he was riding his motorcycle. He hit an oil slick on his way around a turn, and his bike wiped out and flung him over a guardrail and down into a ravine where he broke his leg, and Nadine left him to die. This, Matt, is the part of the show where I remind you and our listeners of something you said 8 weeks ago, 2 months ago, on episode 5 of this very podcast. I'm going to play it for you and for our listeners right here. So Matt, what is your reaction to this clip?
You told me I said this, and I don't even remember. I mean, I remember it now that you played it for me, but I didn't remember saying it. I didn't remember the context. I was just making like a connection that felt meaningful in my head at the time, but I didn't think it was like a real thing. I just sometimes I say things, man. I think it was the white channeling through me in that moment, and the white just really wanted to let me know in advance exactly how Harold was going to die.
You're so glib about it too. That's what I love in the quote. Like, you had no idea you were making an incredibly accurate prediction in that moment, but you sounded so glib and confident. Yeah. And it's like, you don't understand how many emails and messages and things I got from people when you said that so fucking casually. And I just had to like, just be totally chill. And like, I couldn't it was so wonderful.
If I didn't know better, I would say that my tone was in fact smug. When in fact I wasn't even making like a serious prediction at all. I was just like, it kind of reminds me of Piggy in the way the character is sort of situated. And it's pretty funny. Of course, he didn't splatter his brains out on the rocks. He splattered his leg on the rocks. And
he still, you specifically said, I hope there aren't any cliffs in Harold's future. And there was indeed a cliff in his future that he went flying over and broke his leg. So it works. It works, Matt.
Yeah. And just, I definitely did not know that. Did not know that was going to happen. Yeah.
This was not any Matt cheating. This was legitimately just him accidentally being very astute.
Yeah. I'm like Flagg, where the voice just tells me things and then I repeat it, but I'm actually an idiot.
Who is that voice, Matt? Is it the white?
It's got to be. It could be the Crimson King, I guess. I don't know.
So Nadine tells Harold that all of this was arranged, that this was going to happen, and that she's got to go on without him. I love this line she says here, Matt. "We sold our souls together, Harold, but there's enough of me left to want full value for mine." And it's just, I hate Nadine in that moment. I really do.
Nadine, I don't know what the fuck you think you're getting into here.
Yeah.
You got some real kind of weird understanding of the situation, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. But I mean, the implication here though is that like the oil slick that Harold hits is not just a random happenstance. Like even Harold seems to recognize that, right?
Yeah. He's like, where would an oil slick come from?
What is driving on this road that isn't me? Yeah. It's
it's great. Yeah. It's just this whole moment is like 2 layers of evil destroying itself, I think, because Harold is destroying himself by signing a deal with Satan and then being surprised when he's betrayed, and then the Man in Black is sort of shooting himself in the foot, I think, by killing off like a really smart guy who could be like a really good resourceful lieutenant, and he could be put to use, but he's just killing him because it's not even clear why, right? Like why?
Because he's done with him.
He's done with him, and I guess it's like, well, he's untrustworthy. It's like, come on, man, everyone you work with is untrustworthy. But I guess maybe the idea is he knows he can't control Harold purely by fear, because Harold has this whole philosophy now. So he's like, I'm just going to get rid of him. Okay.
Yeah. We see in this moment, though, that Harold pulls out his gun and fires at Nadine. And once again, for the second time this week, we get another moment of surprise. Actually, the third time this week. Surprised by Nadine, of course. But as we'll see a little bit later, also surprised by Flagg. This was not expected. This was not supposed to happen. Harold was not supposed to be this quick and strong and willing to act, right? Nadine is almost killed here, and it would have happened outside of what Flagg wanted, which is another little chink in that armor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. just continuing to give us those little shreds of hope and fear.
Yep. So here, as Harold slowly dies, he thinks back about his life and all the experiences that led to him being here. He thinks about writing. He thinks about the power of it. And in that moment, we get this wonderful quote: "The bricks of language, a stone, a leaf, an unfound door, words, worlds, magic, life and immortality, power." Matt, it's a dark tower.
I recognize it.
It's remember.
Yeah, he certainly does love certain pieces of poetry and fiction a lot.
Yeah, for those that might have forgot, A Stone, a Leaf, an Unfound Door is a Thomas Wolfe poet that was also used in, was it The Wastelands, I think?
Well,
no, it was much later. It was
is it?
I think it was Wolves.
Yeah, I think it's Wolves because, well, I think it's sort of transmogrified into a stone, a key, and unfound door, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they have the key to open the door between worlds, etc. It makes sense there, but it's still clearly a reference to the poem.
But it is so fun to see like this an early version of what will eventually become codified in the Dark Tower. This idea of language and story and words as being this key, this great power. Words, worlds, magic, life, and immortality, power. These are things. This is the way Harold saw himself getting to this power, is through words, through the art of writing, through this wonderfully magical, powerful thing we call writing. And I guess that's interesting, right? Because he kind of sees writing as his ticket, as the one thing that he's good at, the thing that he's better at just about anyone else. And what I love is we kind of joked way earlier in the novel about, hey, maybe Harold's actually just a bad writer, and there's a certain amount of irony in that. And I don't actually think that's what the book is doing. Like I think Harold is young, and so a lot of his writing that we saw in the book like displays an immaturity that comes with being a young man. But I don't think the book wants us to think, oh, Harold, actually you were kind of bad at writing. I think it's not that. It's actually he was rather good at writing, and I think he kind of abandons that for another version of power, right? Like he kind of he thinks his manifesto is like his great work, and this great thing he's created. But he would have been much better served using his power of words to help in other ways. And so part of going with Nadine, going with the Dark Man was abandoning this understanding of the power of words and the power that to create worlds and of life and immortality. These things, he kind of put them aside for more earthly pleasures.
Yeah. And like not even the best ones that were on offer too, because we previously made the point, like, man, just imagine who Harold could have been if he had actually tried to help out in the free zone. And that's what I love about this chapter. One of the many things is he thinks to himself, I forget the exact language, but it's something like, I really could have been someone in the free zone. And it's like a really painful thought for him to recognize the truth of it, which is something, again, that we recognize from the third person, that like, hey, like you've got all these good qualities. You've got all these like admirable, like actually admirable qualities. Like you actually are smart and resourceful and proactive and all these things that would be valuable in creating a new society from scratch. And he threw away that too, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. I think he says, I could have been something in Boulder, he said quietly, and the simple, awful truth of that might have brought tears if he hadn't been so tired and so dehydrated. It's wonderful. And then we see here that Harold writes some more. He writes his final message. He writes a note, an apology, and it's kind of heartbreaking because he's like stuck in a ravine. Actually, I think he's climbed his way up to his bike by then, but he can't ride it because his leg is broken. But he's just like in the middle of nowhere alone, writing his final, will and testament. And there's like, who's going to read this, right? Is anyone going to find this? Who would it be? But he's writing it anyway because that's all he knows what to do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe our characters will come across him. It's
possible. Yeah.
Maybe not. I mean, I think it doesn't matter. Actually, I think this is for him, right? I wouldn't. I wouldn't feel any loss of closure if we just never heard about Harold again, because this is his finding peace with himself.
I agree. And he takes responsibility in these final moments, right? Like he says, I apologize for the destructive things I have done, but do not deny that I did them of my own free will. On my school papers, I always signed my name Harold Emery Lauder. I signed my manuscripts, poor things that they were, the same way. God help me, I once wrote it on the roof of a barn in letters 3 feet high. I want to sign this by a name given to me in Boulder. I could not accept it then, but I take it freely now. I am going to die in my right mind. Writing neatly at the bottom, he affixed his signature. Hawk. And with that, Harold takes the gun, thinks back to the moment of his childhood when he was afraid to make a jump into a gravel pit all the other kids would play in. Harold never jumped and wonders if every problem he faced since that stems from that one moment of inaction. And enacting now, finally, Harold pulls the trigger and takes his own life. And the story of Harold ends here.
And it says he jumped, and I love that. That's great. No, there's so much to dig into there. Like one thing, this is a bit of a deep pull, but it kind of reminds me of that one character in Foucault's Pendulum who, if I recall, he kind of holds back from this brawl between gangs of boys when he was a boy, and then because he kind of held himself back from it, he felt like he missed out on something and like developed this enormous complex for the rest of his life about being the kind of person who can't just commit to something and then, you know, misses out on the rewards of it. I don't know, just a connection to a totally unrelated thing that I thought of.
Yeah, gosh, I haven't thought of that book since the day we finished talking about it. So yeah. I'm surprised you have recall of anything that happened in it. But,
yeah,
no, that's it.
It was one of my least favorite book club books. So
yeah.
But beyond that, there's so many things to say about the ending. I mean, one thing you could say is that maybe this is like a kinder ending than Harold deserves, in a sense, from the storyteller perspective. Like it was surprising to me, I guess, that Harold got a kind of redemption. Not a redemption in the sense that he like does something to earn a redemption, but he gets at least to have a poignant moment of regret. So you can't really hate him like 100%. Maybe you can hate him like 98%. But
and I think it's so important that he takes responsibility for what he did. He doesn't make excuses. He takes responsibility. He also, I love the little bit of, I signed my manuscripts, the poor things that they were, the same way. You know, like he's also come to the realization that, oh, actually that thing that I thought was my great work of genius actually just kind of sucked and wasn't that good, and it was bullshit. It was just me being angry and word vomiting. And I think the reason for that, Matt, is I think King actually sees a lot of himself in Harold or a person he once was, possibly. Sure. You know, there's King loves to write about writers, right? A lot of his main characters are writers, and no one in this story is a writer except for Harold Lauder. So I think there's a lot of him. He put a lot of himself in this character, and you know, some brutally honest, like maybe when I was younger, I behaved in ways that reminded me of Harold a little bit here. Maybe I was angry at the world, and I was bitter about certain things, and I let it cloud my judgment and make poor choices. Hopefully choices not as bad as Harold, but that's the beauty of fiction. You can explore those concepts using terrible events. And so maybe that's why his ending is a little kinder, a little softer than you might expect.
Yeah, you can definitely imagine a young Stephen King who knows that he's good at writing, you know, correctly knows that he's good at writing, finding a lot of sort of room to hide in that knowledge and you know, think like, what, you know, you fucking people don't appreciate me. I'm so great, right? Like I think we all as just humans are prone to sort of ego defensive spirals around whatever we perceive ourselves to be good at, especially if we're not being appreciated. And so, yeah, it's easy to imagine that King himself had experiences like that. I think we all have some experiences somewhat like that at some point.
Yeah.
But, you know, like you said, he takes responsibility. And for our part, I think he doesn't try to make this excuse, but we can look at it objectively and say, like, this is like a 16-year-old kid being manipulated by a literal evil demon wizard. So, like, yes, he is responsible and he does take responsibility, but like, I don't think he would have done any of this if it weren't for Flagg. So that counts for something, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's not that I'm saying you're wrong, but it's like I feel like Harold was heading down a path of destruction regardless, and it's like Flagg handed him the bomb. So yeah, I mean, I feel like something would have happened. It possibly would not have been as destructive and terrible as what he actually did ended up being, but I just felt like his and I don't know, like I say that while also acknowledging that like the moment before Nadine comes to him is a moment where Harold is like on the precipice of finally realizing that he's being a dumbass and accepting, you know, friendship and community and all these things that he's rejecting, even though they're being freely offered to him.
It's the very moment when his head begins to emerge from his ass that Nadine arrives, and sure. So that's all I mean.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's very possible that without that intervention, Harold would have just become a maybe not a great person, but a better person. So yeah, I mean, we'll never know, but I think he's still, it is still important. And I think, again, this is one thing that the book is doing rather consistently is the good guys take responsibility. The bad guys eschew responsibility. And seeing him take that responsibility here, I think is really important.
Yeah.
All right, so rest in peace, Harold. Enjoy your gross payday bars in hell, I guess. I guess that's where you're going. I don't know.
Probably.
I don't know. I wonder how the White feels about. I mean, if the White is standing at the gates of the clearing at the end of the path, like deciding where people get to go, wonder where they would slot old Harold Lauder.
It's an interesting question to ask whether hell is a thing that exists in the Stephen King universe where he has these complicated notions of Ka, where it seems like everything is sort of fated, very Calvinist in a certain sense, where it's like, well, if you were always fated to do that, then how can we torture you forever for what you were fated to do anyway?
Yeah, no. Ask Judas.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's like one of that's almost as interesting a question as the basic theodicy question of why any of this in the first place.
Sure.
I don't know. Well, we're not going to resolve that question right now, I don't think.
I don't think we're ever going to resolve that question. I think that's one of those unresolvable questions, but we can at least talk about it for sure. All right, we move to chapter 65. And so from Harold, we move to the man himself. The chapter begins with Flagg sitting by a campfire, cooking some rabbit and worrying. Things are not going the way he wants. Things are getting a bit flaky, as he calls it. The spies, and then Harold almost killing Nadine. He thinks about Abigail as well, and the voices that went to his head telling him that she said nothing and died in a coma. Flagg no longer trusts this voice, we're being told. So, I mean, you kind of seem to think the voice is the Crimson King, but let me propose something to you here, Matt. What if this is just the White as well? And the White, like, again, I go back to the idea of what Mother Abigail said all those chapters ago, was that, like, he, being Flagg, thinks that what he's doing is not part of God's plan, but everything is part of God's plan. Everything is Ka, right? Like if we change out the word God for the White and we change out God's plan for Ka, then everything, including all the acts of Randall Flagg, is part of Ka. And so the idea that Flagg's been getting a voice that has been feeding him information, and that being part of this whole thing, and then at this point the voice is like, here you go, I'm going to start misleading you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would it's not impossible, for sure. I mean, there's a certain compelling logic to all of it, but I'm just like, why set it up in this particular way? And I think the answer to that has to be like, well, you haven't read the whole book yet, Matt, so you can't really say exactly. I think in retrospect, it'll probably be more, at least slightly more clear one way or the other, whether that reading kind of works for me. So I guess that's just something I'll have to keep in my mind,
Sure,
because
sure.
you're totally right that like that's the kind of like, you know, devil is just an aspect of God, Eru Iluvatar aspect of like everything is part of the plan, even the parts that are going against the plan. But I'm just like, okay, but like why do it that way?
Sure, sure.
We'll
It's
see. We'll
a
see.
valid question for sure. So yeah, I mean, I guess if this is the Crimson King, is he lying to Flagg, or does he just not know
I
either?
I think if it is the eye of the king, the voice of the king, then he just doesn't see it, and he doesn't want to admit that he doesn't see it, or he's, you know, not aware that he doesn't see it because it's being hidden from him.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
It's totally, he's totally eating a rabbit because of the Watership Down connection,
Of
right?
course, of
Yeah,
course, yeah.
yeah.
Don't
So
forget to come to book club, Watership Down,
yeah, Watership Down book club end of the month.
28th.
Um,
So Matt, we see here, we've already kind of talked about this, but we see here that Flagg is starting to lose his memory as well. He can't remember his past lives. He can't even remember, the things he's done in this life. The only thing we see he can remember is the moments that take place in this very book, as if the covers itself are closing around him as we turn the pages more. I love this idea of him kind of just losing himself a little bit here.
yeah, it's really
And
cool.
and I love this quote as well. Once, he was quite sure, he would have done a quick fade when things began to get flaky. Not this time. This was his place, his time, and he would take his stand here. So this is the guy who, tends to pull a Larry and get into flaky situations and get the fuck out, right?
Yeah.
But he's choosing not to in this moment because he feels like this is the moment. This is his stand. There's
Mm-hmm.
they said the title again, Matt.
Yep. There's going to be a stand, and one thing we can be sure of is that our antagonist is down for the stand just as much as our protagonists are. So it's going to be epic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we've just been watching Flagg sort of, you know, be eroded, I guess, very gradually. And it seemed like, at least in the beginning of the book, that he was just like a really bad dude with maybe a kind of a supernatural aura, but no specific powers. But he has opened himself up to like possession or something. And now it's like he's being replaced by this kind of demonic presence where he's losing his memories, he's losing his self, he's losing his identity, he's just becoming this demonic presence who doesn't even remember being a man. It kind of reminds me of like Burnsides and Munchin in Black House, but less like literal than that, more metaphorical, more like when you open yourself up to this kind of evil, then you lose yourself.
Yeah, I like that. Because like what textual reason would there be for, that losing of memory, that losing of humanity
Yeah.
a little bit outside of what you're saying. I like that.
Yeah.
So from here we cut over to Nadine as she continues her journey towards Flagg. She's reeling from her near-death encounter as well, and it has planted a seed of doubt in her. I love this. Flagg knew everything where the smallest sparrow had fallen. No, that's God, the voice replied implacably. God, he's not. You're alive through blind chance, and that means all bets are off. You owe him nothing. You can turn around and go back if you want to. So I love that moment. No, you've confused Flagg for God. God knows everything. God sees everything. Randall Flagg is not God, and therefore he is just as fallible as anyone else.
Mm-hmm. And yet she doesn't turn around and go back.
Nope. She's fully committed herself, despite like I love, she is the one that told Harold too late. And we said then that wasn't true then. And it's not even too late for her now, right? Like it's not. She probably couldn't go back to Boulder. Probably not, but it's not too late for her. And yet, yeah, right. She doesn't turn around.
Well, there were so many times when she thinks to herself, like, I could turn around now, and she repeatedly doesn't. Mm-hmm. There's something very frustrating about Nadine. It's like that person who keeps making bad choices, and it becomes even more frustrating when you're able to talk to them and be like, do you know that you're doing self-destructive things? And they're like, I do, and I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, I mean, like, so I mean, we're gonna get to this moment where she sleeps with Flagg, and it's this horrible, mind breaking experience for her that like completely sends her catatonic.
Hmm.
And it's like, but you knew, like,
Yeah.
I mean, she didn't. I think the experience itself was so horrible that it just breaks her. But like, you knew what Flagg was. You knew, like, I think she just wasn't prepared to actually see it. And yeah, you're absolutely right that she's like, she's not like deluding herself to think that she's doing the right thing or the good thing or the just thing. There's none of that delusion here. It's just literally, this is what she feels she has to do, that she doesn't
Yeah.
have a choice, that she's taking no responsibility.
Yeah. I admit I understand her character less well than I understand, for example, Harold, because
Mhm.
I'm just like, okay, but why? Like why?
Mhm.
It's just the type of character that I struggle with, and maybe other folks empathize with Nadine in certain ways, and
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
obviously, the big difference between her and Harold is that she's a woman, right? And so
Hmm.
maybe, I mean, maybe there is something that we're just not seeing, that
Hmm.
women find incredibly related to. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
she feels a sense of extreme powerlessness.
Hmm.
That's certainly true. That she feels like, you know, we're circling around sex and virginity and these things, and in all this, she feels incredibly powerless to the man in her life. So there might be
Yeah.
something there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like she's a person who believes in destiny and fate and all of this, and then, as I've said, I think in previous weeks, like, just abnegates any personal responsibility and just like, well,
Yeah,
it's my destiny, it's my fate, so I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it,
sure.
and it's like, but you don't, but you could choose not to. And she's like, well, I can't though because it's my fate.
Right.
And
I mean, I guess you could kind of draw the metaphor to say, like, why does a person stay in an abusive relationship, right?
mm,
It's a similar thing where, like, you look at them and logically you're like, why are you're continuing to make this choice? And the reality of it is, it's very very complicated, right? It's very complicated. It's very difficult. It's extremely terrifying. And it's something that it seems like it would be an easy, obvious thing to do, but is not necessarily always quite that clear.
yeah,
So I don't know.
yeah, it's interesting. I have less sharp, intelligent things to say about it because I just have so much trouble relating to her. But
Hmm. I get that. Sure.
yeah,
So Nadine's Vespa breaks down and she begins to walk, and then she walks into dusk, into magic, and into her destiny. And Flagg is there waiting for her. Obviously, the scene where Flagg, rapes Nadine, right? I mean, like, textually, he rapes her is extremely disturbing. But I King writes the scene fantastically, and again, I don't mean the events are fantastic. I just mean the word choices, like what he does, how he constructs the sentences throughout this entire incredibly disturbing sequence, are just incredible to me.
yeah, yeah. No, it's disgusting and, um, like fantastic, right? Like,
Hmm.
in the
Yeah,
sense of
yeah,
like it's epic in scope, while being
yeah.
horrifying. Like, it's interesting to me. I'll just, a very meta comment is, way before we started this project, I can still vaguely remember how I thought Stephen King was, because I hadn't read that many Stephen King books. I'd read, like, one and a half basically,
Hmm.
and I thought there would be more of this. I thought there would be more gross, kind of like operatic horror. And of course, what we have found is it's like 99% like deep human psychology, and then 1% like visceral, gross horror stuff, right?
Hmm.
Much less than I would have thought. But this is the kind of thing that I kind of thought Stephen King was before I knew better.
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly a lot of this, but yeah, I think it's the type of thing where, like, he's such a well-known author that he gets, like, the kind of similar to Flagg, like the myth of who Stephen
Mm,
King is kind of overtakes the reality a lot of times with
it's true.
with a
Yeah,
lot of people. Yeah.
I like that.
Um, So I just wanted to read this section. I don't want to go into a lot of the detail of the reading of the actual event itself, because while well written, it's incredibly disturbing. But I love the language here. He revolts me, she thought. But revulsion was only a scaly crust over something worse, a caked and long hidden lust, an ageless pimple finally brought to a head and about to spew forth some noisome fluid, some sweetness, some long since curdled.
Ew.
It's so good. It's so disgusting. It's so disgusting. But also, like, I don't know. Have you ever like gotten the sweet release of popping a particularly gnarly pimple on yourself? Like, there's some like there's some weird thing with that, right? Like, there's apparently like a whole YouTube channel where people just like watch people pop other people's pimples.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really into that, but like I've had like pimples that I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this thing's been bothering me, and I finally get to pop it. And there's some it's lust is the wrong word, I think, but I love that simile here. I just love it.
Well, it's a deep animal thing, is what it is.
Mm-hmm,
like I'm sure that taps into some billion-year-old instinct that we have for like self-grooming, or maybe even other, grooming each other as primates. It seems to me the kind of thing that would be connected to like grooming and self-maintenance, self-cleaning behaviors. So the fact that we have like a kind of a very like embodied, visceral, felt reaction to it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I get that. So one of the things Flagg says here is he says, call him Richard, that his true name is Richard. Any reaction to that? Who's Richard?
I don't. Am I supposed to remember this? I mean, his name is not Richard, right? His name is, I forget his name now. I know I'm supposed to remember it. I'm just blanking.
No, I'm just kind of letting you die on the vine here.
You are. That's fine. Richard.
It's
Sloat.
It's Walter Paddock is his name.
Right. You're right. Yes.
Richard Sloat. Sure. Yeah. No, it's not. It's. I mean, there have been like Richard Farron, I think, is a character that appeared maybe in Hearts in Atlantis, I think, but yeah, I mean,
it's just another RF, right?
Yeah, but we haven't actually seen him called Richard directly. So this hints to some other greater mythology that we've just frankly never really gotten.
Yeah, and maybe never will. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. So Flagg transforms into his demon self and rides Nadine again and again and again, eventually driving her off the cliff of sanity. After it's all over, Nadine is found catatonic and pregnant, of course. And I guess there's definitely a sense of like, you got what was coming to you, Nadine, but like, I don't know, how pitiable do you think Nadine is in this moment? Obviously, like, this is horrifying. It's a horrifying experience to go through. And I think there's some level of pity there for anyone going through this experience. But like, to your point, like, she was misled, but she it's not, I don't even know if that's true that she was misled, right? Because like Harold, yes, could argue I was misled and I realized it and I still made the choice anyway. And so I have culpability in that. But it feels like Nadine knew the whole time.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't really empathize for Nadine because she's always just made bad choices. And so it's hard for me to feel pity when I don't feel empathy. I agree that she seems to have always had a pretty good idea of what she was in for. I think maybe she romanticized it, but that doesn't mean she didn't know what it was. And maybe she didn't know exactly what it was going to look like, but she knew that it was bad. She knew that her dark bridegroom was like an evil monster. So does it matter that she didn't have, a photo of what it was going to be like? I don't know. I don't feel a ton of empathy for her at all, one way or the other. I just think like, I'm repeating myself now. It's probably uninteresting, but I'm just like, why? Like, why did you do this? Like, this is totally unnecessary, which maybe I'm supposed to feel that way. I mean, take the author as a genius perspective. Like, I'm supposed to be really frustrated with this character because I'm supposed to not understand why a person would behave this way, but also sort of I am actually able to recognize that people do, sort of behave under the influence of compulsions that lead them to do self-destructive things. Maybe that's why I'm
Sure.
frustrated by it, is like knowing that it's like a real thing.
Yeah.
It's not. I'm not frustrated because I'm like, King, why are you writing such an unrealistic character? I'm like, no, this is a real type of person. I just don't like it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that the book wants you to be a bit frustrated and confused. I love the opening lines of the next chapter that we're about to get to are at about the same time that Nadine Cross was beginning to realize certain truths, which should have perhaps been self-evident. So there's definitely some tongue-in-cheekness King is playing at here that like you definitely should have known better, Nadine, and like it should have been obvious. And yet for some reason with you it was not.
And is referencing like the Bill of Rights, I guess, cutely. It's pretty funny.
That's funny. I didn't thought of that, but yeah, that's a cute little play on words there.
Yeah.
So I mean, the weird thing about, or the wonderful thing rather, about the way this chapter ends is this should have been like a great moment of triumph for Flagg, right? He was promised a son that would be a ruler. We could call him the Antichrist. Whatever. He was promised this, and he's just accomplished it. Destiny has been had, but as he goes to bed, once again, an unknown voice talks to him. It says, they're coming. We know who they are. He does not. We also see someone's going. That is Tom, as we're about to see. And then he's like, it's okay. It's like my son will be born in the coming months. And that voice says, are there months? Mm-hmm. Which is just so wonderful. And the chapter ends with, he felt the fear touch him again with its light moss wings. And it's just wonderful. This should have been like, yes, I've did it. My bride is pregnant with my son. The prophecy is becoming fulfilled. Here comes the Antichrist. I've won. And instead, all he can feel is fear.
Yeah. There's just so little human left in him that you wonder if he could even feel that kind of triumph anymore.
Yeah.
One interesting thing about the way his scene is written here is like it's unclear whether he remembers much of anything about what just happened.
I don't think he does.
Yeah.
I think he looks at her and says, what did I do to her? And he doesn't know the answer to that.
He doesn't remember turning into a demon. He doesn't remember any of that. I think he's only partially aware of his nature in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He was honestly puzzled. What had he done to her? He couldn't remember, and it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. She was pregnant.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, the feeling that Flagg is so barely in control of everything that's happening in his world, in his time, right? Like he keeps saying, this is my time, this is mine, this is what for me, and he's like barely in control of any of it at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so we move on to our final chapter of the week, chapter 66. It's kind of a short one, and we're back with Lloyd, and we open the chapter with Lloyd cheating at solitaire, which is just, Matt, it's the best. It's the best image ever. It's so wonderful. Like, let's be clear here, folks. Cheating at solitaire is just sorting cards. You're not even playing a game anymore. You're just sorting cards, and it's wonder. There's no. Yeah. there's no reason to do it, but it's so perfectly Lloyd.
Because I haven't played solitaire in a few years. I'm trying to remember. There's no way to. Is there a way to lose at solitaire, or do you just?
Yeah, you just can't get the cards out you need, and so you lose.
So then he's just cheating. Yeah,
but it's solitaire. You're playing. You're not playing against anyone. It doesn't matter if you win at solitaire. It's just a thing you do to pass the time.
Right. Yes. It's yes. It's just a thing to do with your hands, right? But no, it's so fun. It's just so delightful. I just have to say that I agree with that. Lloyd, like, this is one of the like things that makes him lovably dumb. Is that he's playing solitaire, but he's cheating at solitaire. It's beautiful.
It's so good. So Lloyd, we see, has a problem, and that problem is the Trashcan Man. Turns out that he set fire to a whole bunch of fuel trucks at Indian Springs, the Air Force base they've been training at. The whole airfield could have almost gone up, we see. And so it's very clear here that they have a Trashcan Man problem. But that can't be, because the Trashcan Man is also one of Flagg's, generals, one of his higher ups. How could he be doing this bad stuff that is against what they want to accomplish while also being one of the right hand men of the all powerful, all knowing Randall Flagg, right? And this is a thing that in Lloyd's head he cannot compute. He doesn't
Yeah.
understand how this could be.
Yeah. This is more evil destroys itself stuff, like we talked about.
The other thing I want to talk about here is like, we're not in Trashcan Man's head in this section, and so we don't know what happened. But one of the guys that's reporting this to Lloyd says, you know, we hurt his feelings and he reacted by trying to kill us all. And that's like really sad, right? Like if you think about like when Trash first got to Vegas and people treated him not as a freak, but as a person for like the first time in his life. Like a man shook his hand and people were treating him with respect. And there's this, you know, line of him being really key and important to everything, and people are liking him and he's feeling part of the community. And then something must have happened and someone must have said something that reactivated his old trauma, right? And that's kind of really sad for him. Like I mean, obviously he's not a great person and these are the bad guys, but you just can't help but like wonder what was it that someone said, and just like this dream he had of finding a place where he belongs is kind of destroyed, and he reacted to it very, very badly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm being overly generous, but it almost seemed like the thing that was said was maybe a little bit over the line, but maybe could be construed as just like, you know, the sort of aggressive teasing that men do amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. And but Trash is just not capable of processing that way.
That's very possible.
He's going to immediately jump to like, oh, they're just like the people who abused me, and I need to blow them all up. Yeah,
kind of thinking of Dana and I think her name was Lauren, the woman that she was working with, and they had this back and forth, kind of joking as they were changing the light bulbs. Or she kind of zones out there and she gives her shit, and then they flick each other off, and it's just like playful ribbing. And you wonder what Trashcan's response to that kind of playful ribbing would be.
Right.
So in the midst of all this confusion and uncertainty, Julie Lowry comes to him wanting to see Flagg and give him the answer he seeks to the third spy issue. So of course, in this moment, had Flagg been there, had Lloyd not been so preoccupied with Flagg's failures and what to do with the trash can problem, he might have taken Julie's warning a bit more seriously and actually figured out who the third spy was. But he essentially ignores her, and Flagg fails to get his third spy. Really interested in your reaction here. Like, I guess we set things up with Julie. Like, she's a character that appeared very briefly and then disappeared and then is suddenly thrust back into the story here. And it's like this moment of, oh no, this is how it all goes bad. And then the book says, no, not actually. Because she's not going to be listened to, and then Tom's going to escape.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much as you described. That was my emotional arc, was like a dawning sense of like humor and satisfaction. Like, she's not getting taken seriously. This is great. Mm-hmm. This is what she deserves. Yeah. I hate her. Yeah.
She's been barely in the book. How do you hate her?
I still hate her from before. God, I can nurse a grudge.
She didn't do anything.
No, she was mean to Nick.
She was briefly mean to Nick.
Mean to Tom and Nick, and that's all I need.
Briefly mean to them, and then Nick immediately pulled a gun on her.
I'm a very loyal man. Okay, I love Nick and I love Tom, and thus I hate her.
I am just playing devil's advocate a bit here.
No, you're wrong.
So Tom, we move over to Tom, and he sees the full moon. I love that. Like, I don't know if you remembered the whole full moon command, but we had been seeing the full moon through a couple characters' eyes, and I remember if you remember, that was supposed to be Tom's signal to go home. So if you had remember that, you might have been saying before this moment, "Oh, it's almost time for Tom to pack up and get out of Dodge." But
no, I didn't remember. Well, I didn't remember until this point, and it was because I just didn't realize that much time had passed. Like it seemed like whoa, like it's a lot of,
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while to get there, right?
It takes a while to get there, and then he didn't spend all that much time there, though. So I guess that was my confusion.
Yeah, sure. So Tom sees the full moon, knows it's time to go back. He gets up, grabs his bike, and he's able to just kind of ride out of Las Vegas without being noticed by anyone somehow, which is a little bit more magical than you would think, right?
Yeah. The magical power is with him right now, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's only when he gets on the road that he feels the Eye of Sauron turn his way, but try as he might, Tom is totally hidden from Flagg, and he escapes down the road and starts heading back to Boulder. So we get another good news bit at the end here.
Yeah, it's great.
But I think you're right, though, that the general question of like, okay, but what did Tom learn that is going to be useful? Like, we know Dana Jurgens is not going to be able to report anything back. We know the judge is not going to be able to report anything back. But Tom is the spy that escaped. What morsel of information is he going to impart to our characters? Like, it is very possible that with 4 characters walking down this way and Tom walking back the other way, they could bump into each other, right? And he could impart some knowledge to them. But what could he tell them that is going to help them in the oncoming battle? And an outstanding question.
I should have said before, that's what I guess will happen, actually, is that they'll run into each other, because it just seems a little inelegant for him to like go all the way back to Boulder while our crew has passed him.
Sure.
That's and plus, like, shouldn't they be taking like the same route anyway? So them running into each other just makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
Anyway, I don't know, and I think we're meant not to know. I mean, because it's like, well, he could tell them that they're practicing jet fighter runs, but it's like, well, okay, what are they going to do with that information? They could blow up the jets. That's a little. That's not really that's not what I feel like they're there for. They're there to make some kind of spiritual stand against evil, which does not involve like a heist film starting suddenly where you have to
sneak onto an airfield and detonate jets. Yeah,
exactly. So it's going to be something more subtle, something more in the vein of personalities and character and the things of the spirit.
Sure. Well, we will find out, won't we?
I hope so.
Possibly as soon as next week.
Yeah, ideally.
Unbelievably.
Yeah, seriously.
Everything's coming to a head. Yeah. So that is where we leave Tom riding out into the night. And again, we didn't get anything from our 4 musketeers this week at all. We have nothing. We saw no Larry, we saw no Stu, no Ralph, and no Glenn this week at all.
I kind of enjoyed the break in, like I said at the beginning, like tone and the sort of the story voice for a while.
I totally agree. I loved it. I'm glad we were back with these characters. I'm glad we got caught up on what's going on here, and I really loved this week's reading a whole lot.
Me too.
But that is it for the reading this week. Next week, as I said, we will be reaching the climax of The Stand. We'll be covering covering chapters 67 through 73. This is, I think, one of the few sections, Matt, that I specifically targeted to make sure we got through the end of the climax. Usually I just do it totally based off page numbers and don't look at any content. I think I made sure here that we get through the climax in this one, and then everything after chapter 73 is denouement. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you that, yeah, everything's going to be climactic next week.
All right, can't wait.
But before we go, it's discussion question time, Matt, everyone's favorite section of the podcast. And what question is it that we asked our listeners last week?
What's the best / most effective / whatever explosion in fiction?
And man, people really like explosions.
Yeah,
because we got so many responses to this one.
Pleasantly surprised by explosion talk.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's read them.
Yeah. So Eladin OS. By the way, we had like a lot of new people answering this week. I don't know why.
Wonderful.
Exactly. Like a lot.
That's great.
So Eladin OS said, "My favorite explosion in fiction has to be the Death Star. It's the climax of the entire movie with a perfect action sequence beforehand leading up to it, and the rising tension of whether the rebels will be able to blow it up before it blows them up. And then after Luke has fired the torpedo successfully, the tense music builds. The Death Star is about to fire its laser. The remaining rebel ships fly away as fast as possible from the impending explosion. And then, boom, the Death Star explodes in an instant, and the music stops for a moment, and then peacefully starts up again as the sparks from the explosion float into space. It's an incredible catharsis and one of the most famous moments in movie history for a reason." Yes.
I agree. Wonderful, wonderful explosion.
Yeah, you're right. Everything about that scene is perfectly edited to build toward that moment of, like you said, catharsis. It's great.
Don't they cut to Tarkin like right
Uh-huh.
like right as
Yeah.
like there's this sense of triumph on his face as he like orders the Death Star to fire,
Yeah.
that I find so wonderfully delicious because it happens like right
Yeah.
before it explodes.
Right. And he has no idea that this is
Yeah.
about to happen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
great.
it's great. We also have Kramer Jr. 13, who says, for the discussion question, as a couple others have mentioned, the first thing that came to mind, it was Star Wars, both the first Death Star and the destruction of Alderaan. I think Alderaan is worth mentioning because I remember having my mind blown as a kid, seeing and thinking how wild it was to just obliterate an entire planet. And so casually. Both that and the Death Star explosion at the end are so iconic and immediately recognizable, even from just a still from the film. As a side note to that, if anyone hasn't watched the docuseries about Industrial Light and Magic on Disney Plus, it's worth the time. So many brilliant people just trying to think of cool ways to make movies magical, and so much impact on pretty much every modern movie.
Yeah,
That's
that's
great. I
awesome.
think I'm glad he brought in the Alderaan destruction as well, because that is definitely a holy shit moment for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can remember vaguely being a kid and that being an unusually horrific thing to think
Mm-hmm.
about. Like even kids can experience a sort of awestruck horror at the idea of destroying a planet because it's just
Definitely.
so yeah. Cool. Good answer. Like a Fox says, my first thought for an iconic fictional explosion was the opening blast in Akira. Massive, blinding, all-encompassing. But to make up for forcing one of our fearless hosts to read an anime answer, the second answer I thought of is from Worm, which I will describe as spoiler-free as possible, as simply the start of Gold Morning.
Ooh,
Yes.
isn't that tantalizing for our listeners who haven't read Worm? You should go read it so you know what that is about.
I agree that the start of Gold Morning explosion is the one, much like the Death Star explosion, punctuates a moment that has been built up to perfectly and makes you like it's one of the great holy shit moments of reading for me of my life
Mm-hmm.
personally.
Yeah, it's really great. And joke's on you, Like a Fox. I like Akira. It's a good movie. Or
Yeah.
as I said when I was a smaller child, Akira.
Akira, yeah.
I definitely pronounced that Akira for half my life.
I mean, I usually still do. I just try to put some effort into pronouncing things when we're on the air.
Yeah, yeah. Lanosaurus says, my favorite use of explosions in fiction is every story written by students of Irish during our time in school. There's been problems with the syllabus for years, but every student has to write a story in Irish for their final exam, and every one of them learns a specific phrase to use as the turning point of the story, which is gu tuban, which means suddenly. This is usually followed by an explosion in the story, or at least it did in all of mine. I think if I read back over any of those old stories, I would probably cringe so hard I'd explode myself, but it always makes me laugh, and it's always thrown into conversations with friends whenever we meet up. Second favorite is when Homer uses Pop Rocks and Coke to save Mark Hamill from a mob of nerds in The Simpsons. One of my all-time favorite episodes, especially since it combines two of my favorite things, The Simpsons and Star Wars together at last.
My favorite thing about that one is that it's Pop Rocks and Coke, and then he throws it, and then they jump away from the explosion, and then it's like a gigantic fireball explosion, right? Which makes no sense. That's why it's funny. See, I explained the joke. Now you understand. The Irish thing is fascinating.
Yeah, my parents actually just got back from visiting Ireland, and I that was when I learned that like everyone in Ireland is currently kind of required to take classes on the Irish language, which I did not know was a thing.
I did not either.
That they're actively trying to bring back the language, and that's part of it. So that's pretty cool.
Yes, that is cool. And I also remember using the word abusing the word suddenly in stories when I was a kid. I would just normal things would be happening, and then suddenly there'd be velociraptors there.
Is it do people have, this might be a question for the question answer, but is it still called Gaelic or is it just called Irish? I don't actually know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, yeah, let us know.
Yeah.
All right. RR215 says, one of my favorite uses of an explosion in fiction comes from the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Cause and Effect, Season 5, Episode 18. The Enterprise is stuck in a temporal causality loop, or time loop, with each cycle leading to a particularly potent explosion, resulting in the ship being lost with all hands. It is a great episode that features a slow build-up, subtle hints, a repeating number, and the smartest character on the show having to recognize he is wrong. The looming explosion makes it clear that the stakes are of the highest concern, and you learn alongside the crew that something is terribly amiss. Yeah, I love that episode.
That's a really good episode. I love. We both love Next Generation, and I remember that episode very distinctly.
Yeah. There's something that really kind of amp things up when you see the beloved Enterprise explode like 4 times in that episode, because it keeps rewinding, obviously.
Yeah. Pear Jane says, I also have a Star Trek answer. I have many favorite explosions, but my favorite is because I love a great needle drop and queuing up the Beastie Boys' Sabotage classical music to our heroes before going into Star Trek Beyond's battle is an epic decision second only to using Why as the big booming climax. It is on my list of cheer up hype videos that I pull up when I need an extra endorphin boost. No great themes, just a great fucking balls out blow 'em up to the perfect melodic moment. And I just realized Eddie Dean would have been a Beastie Boys fan.
That's great.
A distant second is when we take off and nuke the site from orbit, because it's the only way to be sure.
Love it.
Thanks for getting an Aliens reference in there. How did you feel about Star Trek Beyond, Matt? Because I liked it a whole lot. So I am fairly mixed on the new Star Trek series. I think Into Darkness was just bad, but I liked Beyond. I did. And I'm sad that it seems like that's going to be the last one in the series. We're done with that cast.
I think I liked it. I've only seen it the one time, so I don't have like huge fond feelings attached. But I was like, I felt like they finally hit their stride, honestly, of just like, oh, this is just like fun, and they're not trying to be melodramatic in the way that Into Darkness was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like that's over now.
Did we ever talk about the fact that like they announced Star Trek 4, like by just putting it on their, I think it was Paramount that does this. They just put it on their release calendar, and that's how they announced it. And then everyone like called up the actors and were like, "Did you know? Are you going to be in Star Trek 4?" And they were like, "I don't know. They didn't tell us about this."
Oh my God.
And then they just like quietly removed it from the slate after that.
Oh dear! Wow.
It's just further proof that like, you know, you think the movie industry is like this incredibly well managed thing, but nobody knows what the fuck they're doing.
It's just like our jobs where sometimes you just gotta like, God, what are we gonna do about this? I don't know, just put it on the thing.
Just put it on the calendar. Yeah.
Right.
Of course, that's a terrible place to begin negotiations with an actor for their salary when you've already announced the project before you've signed a contract with them.
Yeah.
Dumb.
Good point. Well, it seems like it didn't work.
Yeah.
All right. Xeno Hinge says, long-time listener, first-time answer. My favorite explosion might be a bit of a deep cut, but in Warhammer 40k, the Horus Heresy novelization series, when Warmaster Horus cements his betrayal of the Emperor and the Imperium of Man by unleashing Exterminatus on unsuspecting loyalist space marines brought to the planet Istavan 3 under false pretenses. In 40k, Exterminatus is composed of 2 main phases. The first is virus bombing. Sci-fi flesh-eating viruses are dispersed into the planet jet stream, which spread rapidly to break down organic matter even more rapidly. This planet-wide decay releases an unfathomable fuckload of flammable gas. The second phase is igniting the atmosphere via orbital bombardment to mop up any unlikely survivors. 200,000 loyal space marines, the baddest motherfuckers in the galaxy, many from his own legions, were eradicated in a planet-wide explosion, leaving Istvan 3 a charred, airless cinder floating in space, a silent monument to the event which plunged the galaxy into 10,000 years of brutal civil war.
Hey, you know Warhammer stuff. Did you get any of that?
Yeah, I know all of those things. I wasn't actually specifically familiar with the bombing of this particular planet, but I'm aware of the Horus Heresy and the Exterminatus and literally every one of these words and concepts, because I love 40k lore. I actually think 40k lore is like a very rich sci-fi setting, and I enjoy thinking about it. The orcs are my favorite sci-fi thing from 40k because they're a fungus that spawns orcs out of it and then spreads by spores. Yeah, that's great. Love it.
Cool. I have never played any 40k thing, so that was a bunch of stuff I didn't understand, but it sounds pretty cool.
It is.
Stephen Flagg says, my all-time favorite explosion in cinema has to be watching the Death Star ones, although I think the one from Return of the Jedi is more satisfying for obvious reasons.
Yeah,
More satisfying, I think, is definitely true.
Return of the Jedi is just different because the technology had advanced so far that the Death Star, run could be a lot more sort of fantastically shot. So there are some ways, and also the fact that it's like intercut with my favorite Star Wars sequence ever, which is the Vader, Emperor, Luke scene. I love that.
The best sequence in Star Wars, certainly. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, good answer. Renee Run says, my favorite explosion is from one of my favorite movies, Aliens. There's Ripley, hopeless until the last second that Bishop deserts her. That Bishop deserted her. The Queen appearing, and the countdown continuing. Finally, punch it, Bishop, and we're off with so few seconds to reach minimum safe distance. The score is so powerful as the station explodes, and then the sweet relief of safety. The explosion had to happen one way or another. It's the only way to be sure. Yep.
Of course, that's not including the small question of how the fuck that Queen alien got on that ship in that amount of time. But as Ridley Scott would say, who fucking cares?
Well, you saw that the landing gear got caught on the metal on the thing.
How would it fit in the landing gear, Matt?
It was a really big ship.
Okay, was it though?
I'm gonna make things up to make this make sense, Scott.
I don't think it was that big of a ship. It ultimately doesn't matter. But yes, lie. that explosion is really, really great. I love how the actor who plays Bishop handles the shockwave hitting him. I don't know. I just love his performance in that, where he's just like tensing for it, and then it just like rocks him, and it's like that's so good.
Me too. I can perfectly picture every moment of this scene. So yes, good answer.
Yeah. Trumpet Cop, who, for those that don't know, is our friend that is doing incredible work doing the differences between the episodes posts on our Reddit every week. I usually wait till after the episode to read them, so I haven't read this week's yet, but if you're following along with the book, he is painstakingly going through all differences between the 1978 and 1990 versions of this novel. So thank you, Trumpet Cop. Here is your answer. I guess it says honorable mention here, Matt, so I guess they had a different answer that was probably a repeat of one of our earlier ones.
I don't know what happened there.
Okay. Well, we're doing your honorable mention, Trumpet Cop, which is the exploding toilet in Lethal Weapon 2 for the humor aspect. I'm going with maybe this just got put out of order by your algorithm.
Maybe.
I'm going with all of the space explosions in Firefly, since it's the only show I know that doesn't add sound to explosions in space. That is so true. It is consistent in no sound being in space in Firefly.
Yeah, there's something that's even more visceral about no sound explosions in space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, I guess because it's more realistic.
I do love Trumpet Cop's honorable mention of the toilet explosion in Lethal Weapon 2, because that was such a great scene. I love Lethal Weapon. Love it so much.
Yeah.
Is it Lethal Weapon 2 or Lethal Weapon 1 in which Murtaugh is just naked in the bathtub and his entire family comes in the room?
It's 1, because everyone is naked at the beginning of the movie. When we meet Riggs, he's naked. When we meet Murtaugh, he's in the bathroom. The woman who's murdered, who kicks off the plot, is like naked and jumps out a window. There's a lot of birth imagery at the beginning of the movie.
That's very true. I still don't think it's a good idea for your 16-year-old daughter to walk in the bathroom when you're sitting in a bath naked, though. That's just, it's weird. It's weird.
It was a different time. Just
water is see-through.
I just want to mention the idea of like explosions in space. Like the only cool thing about Star Wars Episode 2 was like the little mine thing that I think Jango Fett has the mines where it's like you see them explode, and then like a second later you hear the sound, and the delay of the sound is like, it's just such a great idea. It just makes it hit so much harder. All right.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah.
Last answer. Steve Living Room says the Star Wars Death Star exploding. It's one of the most satisfying explosions ever. On a side note, the weirdest explosion that I actually experienced was popping a zit. We were just talking about that.
Oh my God.
They say in my ear. It was seriously like a mini explosion. So weird, funny, and cool.
Steve, did
Yeah.
you get like a carnal satisfaction
Did
in that moment?
your mouth water? I think we should be more honest about how pleasurable popping zits is as a
I
culture.
I was kind of like hiding my true feelings, but it's actually pretty nice.
Yeah, yeah. We all pretend like, oh, that's gross.
Oh,
It's
gross.
like, I mean, it's it's not. It's not. I'm going to take a stand here. This is my stand. It's my personal stand. It's
I'm
not that
glad this
gross.
is what you took from
Yeah.
this book is you need to make your own personal stand, and yours is pro zit popping. I love it.
Pro talking about zit popping.
Yeah, we need to. We're just a bunch of animals, and
Yeah.
we get zits, and we need to pop them.
Yeah, there's nothing shameful about it.
Although apparently the way we pop them is actually really bad, and the reason kids get like pock marks in their face is because they're popping them manually. You're supposed to use like a little pin, and that prevents scarring.
There's definitely a right way to do it, and a wrong way to do it.
There's a right way to do it and a fun way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, then that's gonna do it. That's gonna do it for Body Talk with Scott and Matt.
Gonna do it for the whole show. That's it.
We don't come back from this. We really don't.
Yeah, if you're listening next week,
listening to us, just imagine us popping pimples as we're doing it.
Yeah. If you come back next week, I'll be surprised,
but very grateful.
Yeah.
All right, Matt. What is our discussion question for next week?
So you've heard a lot over the past few weeks what we think about Harold, but what about you? Let's all pour one out for Hawk by telling us your favorite or least favorite Harold Lauder moments.
Yeah, I think we like to do this every time we lose a character. Sometimes beloved characters, like with some of our Dark Tower characters, but sometimes less beloved characters. I think Hawk is worthy of more conversation, and so we're gonna turn that over to you folks and let us know about what your feelings about good old Hawk.
Yeah, this will be fun.
Mm-hmm. All right, folks, that is gonna do it for us here this week. Next week, it's coming to a climax, Matt. Our penultimate episode of The Stand, covering chapters 67 through 73. Read those chapters and join us next week for Matt's reaction to how everything goes down.
Yeah, and remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit at r/doofmedia is probably the most straightforward way to reach us.
Mm-hmm. And if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you make sure you never miss a single episode. We are everywhere. We are on YouTube. We are on Spotify. We are on other podcast apps that I don't even know about. We get emails every week about joining exclusive podcasting communities that I think are just spam, but we're probably already on those too, because they usually just take our audio files and put them up anyway.
Yeah.
But so we're even in those places.
Yeah. We can't stop them, folks.
We literally cannot stop them.
Yeah. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. As we said at the top of the show, there's all sorts of fun stuff over there, including the Dead Zone discussion this week.
Yeah, definitely check that out if you haven't already. And of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely totally fine. We understand that sometimes you're just not in a position to be able to support us financially, but you can support us socially, spiritually. Believe in us, have faith, and share us with all your friends.
That's right.
And to make sure, if you haven't already, that you are leaving us a rating and a review on the podcasting platform of your choice. This week's spotlight review comes from Maddie H787, who gives us 5 stars and says, "I love this podcast. I work remotely and I'm on the road a lot. Listening to the audiobooks of The Dark Tower, followed by discussions with Matt and Scott, has been such a fun and rewarding experience. I usually feel like I forget what happens in the books I read, but spending a lot more time thinking critically about these books has given me a much better sense of the individual books and the series as a whole. Scott and Matt do a great job of breaking down the immensity that is the series while providing lots of laughs as well. I can't wait to continue on to season 2 and experience King stories I've never read before and revisit others that I love. Thanks, Doof Media." No, thank you, Maddie. That is so nice, and we really do appreciate that.
Yeah. Hopefully you just skimmed over all that pimple talk earlier, but we really appreciate the compliments about our stuff. Thank you.
Did we really pause our Stephen King podcast for 2 minutes to talk about how fun it is to pop pimples? Is that actually something that happened?
This is what happens when you and I get tired and silly, Scott.
Yeah, it's 12 o'clock in the morning. So we're gonna go to bed, not talk about this anymore. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you right back here next week, I hope, for our penultimate episode of The Stand. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.